Before dinosaurs ruled the Earth, there was a quieter, stranger world, a wounded planet, still recovering from the greatest mass extinction life had ever survived. In the Triassic Period, vast deserts stretched across Pangaea. Reptiles returned to the sea. The first wings lifted into the air. Tiny mammal relatives hid in the dark. And the earliest dinosaurs began as small, uncertain shapes in a world still ruled by other giants. Welcome to Calm Earth Science. If this kind of deep time journey helps you relax, learn, or drift gently towards sleep, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who enjoys Earth's ancient story. Thank you for spending your time here. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment telling us what time it is where you are, and where in the world you are watching or listening from. Now, let us step softly into the quiet dawn of the dinosaur age. The Triassic begins not with a flourish of new life, but with absence. Across the surface of Earth, the great networks of the Permian world have been cut apart by extinction so severe that the usual language of loss becomes almost too small for it. Forests have thinned, reefs have collapsed, food chains that once stretched from mud-dwelling animals to large hunters have broken in places where no quick repair is possible. The planet is still warm, still turning, still washed by oceans and ringed by coastlines. But biologically, it has been emptied to a degree that no earlier crisis had achieved. The Mesozoic era, later remembered for dinosaurs, flying reptiles, marine giants, and dense green worlds, opens in this quieter condition, with survivors moving through landscapes where the old abundance has not returned. The Permian extinction does not end cleanly at a boundary in stone. It leaves behind a damaged atmosphere, disturbed oceans, overheated land, and ecosystems so simplified that recovery can only happen slowly. For living things, the first Triassic world is not a new age of promise. It is the aftermath of a near ending, 252 million years before the present. Earth has just passed through the closest approach to biological ruin in its history. The causes are rooted deep inside the planet, in enormous volcanic eruptions across the region, now preserved as the Siberian traps. Over long spans of time, lava and gases pour into the air, altering climate, acidifying waters, and driving heat through systems that were already vulnerable. Oceans lose oxygen, shallow seas become hostile. On land, drought, heat, and unstable seasons press against plants and animals that had evolved under very different conditions. The collapse is not a single instant. It is a long unraveling. And that matters because a drawn-out crisis can damage more than the organisms directly killed by it. It can damage the relationships that allow survivors to keep surviving. A plant lineage may endure, but the soils or rainfall patterns around it may change. A predator may survive, but its prey may not. A burrowing animal may pass through the worst interval, only to emerge into a world where food has become scarce and competitors are gone in ways that change the entire shape of daily life. What remains at the opening of the Triassic is therefore not simply a smaller version of the Permian. It is a rearranged world, stripped down to a few durable threads. The great synapsid-dominated ecosystems of the late Permian, with their tusked herbivores and saber-toothed predators, no longer hold the same structure. Many of the large carnivores have vanished. Many herbivore groups are reduced or gone. In the oceans, the damage is even more severe. Reef builders have been devastated. Bottom-dwelling communities have lost much of their variety. Ammonoids, brachiopods, mollusks, fishes, and many other groups pass through the boundary unevenly, some nearly disappearing before radiating again. The early Triassic fossil record often carries the signature of this shock in simplified communities, low diversity, and the repeated presence of a few hardy forms across enormous regions. It is not a world without life, but it is a world where life has been narrowed. That narrowing gives the period its first strange quality. In many places, the same survivors appear again and again. not because they represent a stable perfection, but because so few lineages are left to occupy the available space. Among the most famous is Lystrosaurus, a squat, tusked dicynodont synapsid with a beaked mouth, sturdy limbs, and a body suited to harsh conditions. It becomes astonishingly widespread after the extinction, known from lands that are now South Africa, India, and Antarctica, because those lands are then joined within Pangaea. Its success is not glamorous, but it is deeply revealing. Lystrosaurus seems to belong to a survival world, not an abundant one. Its build suggests an animal capable of feeding on tough vegetation, perhaps digging for roots and underground plant parts, and enduring conditions that would have defeated more specialized creatures. In some early Triassic deposits, it becomes so common that it seems almost to stand in for an entire damaged ecosystem. The dominance of such an animal is not a sign that the world has healed. It is a sign that the world has become simple enough for one resilient form to fill much of the space left open. Around animals like Lystrosaurus, the land is not yet ready to support the dense ecological variety that later Triassic landscapes will hold. Plants are recovering from repeated stress. Soils may be unstable or thin in many regions. Insects and small vertebrates survive in scattered ways, but the complex web of interactions has to be rebuilt across generations beyond easy counting. The first stages of recovery are therefore quiet, uneven, and vulnerable to reversal. In the fossil record, this appears as a long delay. After many mass extinctions, life diversifies relatively quickly on geological scales, as empty niches invite new experiments. After the end Permian catastrophe, recovery takes much longer. For millions of years, the planet remains caught between survival and renewal. The old world is gone, but the new one has not yet acquired its structure. That delay is one of the central facts of the early Triassic. It shows that extinction is not only about how many species disappear, it is also about how deeply the physical world has been altered. If temperature, chemistry, rainfall, and ocean oxygen remain unstable, then the survivors inherit not an open field, but a landscape still capable of punishing them. The continents themselves add to the pressure. By this time, nearly all major landmasses have assembled into Pangaea, a single immense continent stretching across much of the globe. Its existence gives the Triassic a geography unlike the later world. There are no broad Atlantic waters dividing the land. There are no separated continents carrying their own long isolated histories. Instead, animals can move across huge connected territories, and climate can operate across distances almost too large to picture. But connection does not mean comfort. The interior of a supercontinent lies far from the moderating influence of the sea. Moisture has difficulty reaching deep inland. Seasonal extremes become stronger. Heat can build over broad, dry basins. The same geography that allows a survivor such as Lystrosaurus to spread also helps create the severe conditions that make survival so difficult. Pangaea is both corridor and furnace, and at the dawn of the Triassic, its size shapes every recovery taking place upon it. The oceans around this supercontinent are also changed. Warm temperatures and low oxygen damage marine habitats, especially in shallow shelves where much Paleozoic diversity once flourished. Reefs, among the richest structures in the sea, are slow to return. Without them, entire communities lack the architecture that once supported fish, invertebrates, and countless smaller organisms. Yet even in these diminished waters, some ammonoids survive and later radiate. Some fishes persist. Sharks endure. The sea, like the land, is not dead. It is waiting for conditions to become steady enough for complexity to grow again. The early Triassic is therefore a time of thresholds rather than triumphs. Every surviving lineage carries a history of endurance, but endurance alone does not guarantee a future. A species may pass through the extinction and still fail in the unstable world that follows. A lineage may shrink into refuges and remain there for millions of years before opportunity returns. The animals of this time are living in a biological low tide. when the outlines of the shore are exposed and the richness of the returning sea is still far away. The recovery of life is not a single wave rushing back over empty ground. It is a gradual thickening. More plants stabilize more soil. More soil holds more moisture. More herbivores allow more predators. More stable climates allow more specialization. Each layer depends on others. And early on, many are missing. This is why the Triassic dawn can feel so quiet, despite the magnitude of what it begins. Later, the period will become famous for strangeness and invention. Reptiles will return to the sea. Archosaurs will rise across the land. The first dinosaurs will appear in modest bodies, not yet rulers, but already carrying the deep anatomical hints of what they may become. Pterosaurs will eventually lift vertebrate bodies into powered flight. Mammal relatives will retreat into smallness while refining traits that will matter far into the future. But none of that is visible yet in full form at the beginning. The first scene is simpler and more austere. The world has been reduced to endurance, and the story has to begin with what remains. In this sense, the Triassic is not merely the opening chapter of the dinosaur age. It is the long recovery that makes such an age possible. The dinosaurs do not arise from a thriving paradise. They emerge from a planet that has been wounded, simplified, heated, dried, and forced into new arrangements. Their dawn is quiet because the world around them is still learning how to be abundant again. Before there can be giants, forests, herds, wings, and the sprawling drama of later Mesozoic ecosystems, there must first be persistence in the bare spaces after catastrophe. The early Triassic holds that persistence in its rocks, in its repeated survivors, in its thin communities, and in the long delay before diversity returns. It is the age of what is left, and within what is left, the first faint architecture of everything to come. The shape of Pangaea gives the early Triassic its first great physical constraint. A single supercontinent does not behave like a cluster of smaller lands broken by shallow seas and humid margins. It gathers heat differently. It moves air differently. It stretches distance until the sea, which usually softens climate and feeds rainfall inland, becomes too far away to matter across much of the interior. Along the edges, where ocean winds can still arrive heavy with moisture, life finds a little more room. Farther inward, the land becomes broad, exposed, and difficult. Rain weakens as it travels. Rivers lose strength or vanish into basins. Evaporation pulls water back into the air before it can build lasting wetlands. What remains across enormous regions is a dry planetary heart, a landscape where survival is shaped not by the richness of ecosystems, but by the management of scarcity. This is not simply desert in the ordinary sense of a sandy place beneath a hot sky. It is a continental condition, produced by geography at a scale that no living animal can escape. The supercontinent has become a climate machine, and much of its inland surface receives the hard output of that machine as heat, drought, and seasonal instability. The early Triassic atmosphere still carries the burden of the catastrophe that came before it. Greenhouse gases released by great volcanism have warmed the planet, and that warmth presses especially hard on land. In some regions, temperature estimates imply conditions that would be dangerous even for animals well adapted to heat, with summer ground temperatures perhaps reaching levels close to 60 degrees Celsius. Such figures should not be imagined as a steady condition everywhere at every hour. Ancient climates shift across seasons, latitude, bassin, and elevations. But the broader signal is clear enough. Pangaea is hot, and its interior is often brutally dry. A body moving across that land has to solve problems that are immediate and physical. It must avoid overheating. It must find water before water disappears. It must feed in places where plants grow slowly, patchily, or only after brief windows of rain. It must reproduce in a world where eggs, young, and soft plant tissues are all exposed to stress. The simple act of remaining alive becomes linked to timing. Shelter, And physiology. A shaded burrow, a root system beneath hard soil, a seasonal pool, or a strip of vegetation near a drainage line may determine whether a lineage continues or fails. The rocks of this world often preserve the evidence of dryness in red beds, sandstones, evaporite minerals, and signs of soils exposed to air. Red colors in ancient sediment can form when iron minerals oxidize, a chemical trace of well-drained, oxygen-rich conditions rather than permanently waterlogged ground. Evaporites point toward waters that concentrate dissolved minerals as they shrink and vanish. Wind-blown sands and broad floodplain deposits suggest landscapes where water appears episodically, sometimes with force, but does not remain as a stable support for dense life. The result is not a lifeless emptiness. Deserts and drylands can hold intricate communities, but in the earliest Triassic, those communities are growing out of a devastated inheritance. They do not yet have the full complexity that later dry ecosystems will develop. Plants are fewer in kinds and often restricted to favorable settings. The vegetation that does persist must tolerate heat, drought, poor soils, or disturbance. Seed plants, tough stems, underground storage tissues, and drought-resistant forms have advantages. While delicate moisture-dependent communities retreat to refuges, this matters because animals do not face climate directly alone. They face climate through food. When plants are sparse, every herbivore becomes part of a narrower equation, and every predator depends on that equation holding together long enough to support prey. The interior of Pangaea, therefore, filters survivors with unusual severity. It favors animals that can endure long gaps between meals, use limited resources efficiently, or exploit foods that other animals cannot easily process. For reptiles with lower resting energy demands, warmth can be useful as well as dangerous. A body that relies heavily on external heat may spend fewer calories maintaining its internal temperature, and in a world where food is unreliable, that economy matters. This does not make such animals invulnerable. Extreme heat can kill an ectothermic animal just as surely as cold can slow it. But under the right conditions, a lower energy lifestyle can be a profound advantage when ecosystems are thin. By contrast, many synapsids, the broader lineage that includes the ancestors and relatives of mammals, appear to have faced a harder balance. More active metabolisms can support endurance, colder climate tolerance, and steady activity, but they demand regular food. In the depleted early Triassic, that demand becomes costly. The old Permian strengths no longer guarantee success. The world has changed the terms of the contest. Lystrosaurus fits this landscape because it is not elegant in the later sense of evolutionary success. It is sturdy, compact, and practical. Its beaked jaws and tusks suggest a feeding style able to handle tough plant material, and its limb bones have often been interpreted as compatible with digging, or at least powerful movement through difficult ground. Whether every population burrowed in the same way remains uncertain, but the survival value of shelter is easy to understand in such a climate. Underground spaces buffer heat. They hold humidity longer than open air. They offer protection from temperature spikes and perhaps from the worst dryness of the day. In a world where the surface can become punishing, the boundary between above and below becomes more than a place. It becomes a survival strategy. Many later animals in dry environments will solve the same problem by retreating into burrows, becoming active at cooler times, feeding opportunistically, or living close to scattered water. The early Triassic shows these pressures already at work, not as a refined desert fauna, but as the beginning of life reorganizing around the demands of a supercontinental dryland. The absence of large, diverse predator communities also shapes this interior. For a time after the extinction, many of the great Permian carnivores are gone, and the land lacks the layered hierarchy of hunters that once made ecosystems more complex. This gives certain herbivores room to spread widely, but it also reflects how incomplete the recovery remains. A rich world does not contain only survivors. It contains interactions among many kinds of survivors. The early Triassic has fewer such layers. Some areas may be dominated by a narrow selection of animals, with Lystrosaurus and other hardy forms standing where many specialized herbivores and carnivores once lived. This simplicity can look stable from a distance, yet it is fragile because a system with few parts has fewer alternatives when conditions change. If one plant resource fails, there may be little else to replace it. If drought lasts longer than usual, the animals tied to seasonal growth may be forced into shrinking refuges. If heat rises beyond tolerance, mobility itself becomes a hazard, because crossing open ground requires water and energy that may not be available. Across Pangaea, the dry interior does not remain identical from one region to another. The supercontinent spans latitudes and surrounds mountain belts, basin, river systems, and coastlines that break the broad pattern into local worlds. Some places hold seasonal floodplains. Others preserve lake basins that swell and contract through time. Higher ground and coastal margins offer more forgiving conditions. Yet the general structure remains powerful. Moisture is uneven. Heat is widespread. The farther from marine influence a region lies, the more it tends toward extremes. This geography helps explain why early Triassic recovery is not a smooth expansion from one center of life. It is more like a series of small repairs taking place wherever conditions allow them. A valley with enough water may hold a more diverse pocket. A coastal strip may support denser plant growth. A river corridor may become a route for animals spreading across the land. But between these places are distances where life has to travel carefully or not at all. Pangaea is connected on a map, but for living bodies, it is divided by heat, thirst, and the uneven placement of food. The dryness also influences the future in a quieter way, by favoring traits that will later become important in the rise of reptiles: efficient water use, shelled eggs, protective skin, flexible feeding strategies, and the ability to move through open habitats all matter in such a world. These traits had histories older than the Triassic, but the early Mesozoic climate gives them new consequence. The age of reptiles is not born simply because reptiles appear. They had already existed for a very long time. It begins because the planet creates conditions in which many reptile lineages can expand while others struggle to regain former ground. This is one of the deeper patterns of the Triassic dawn. Evolution does not choose a dynasty in advance. It changes the stage, and certain bodies suddenly fit that stage better than before. The dry heart of Pangaea is part of that stage, severe enough to slow recovery, broad enough to shape migration, and persistent enough to influence which survivors become founders of later worlds. The land is open, but not generous. It offers space without abundance, sunlight without softness, and a connected continent whose unity often makes life harder rather than easier. In that great inland heat, the first outlines of the Mesozoic begin to sharpen, not through spectacle, but through endurance under pressure. The margins of early Triassic Pangaea carry a different kind of silence from the deep interior. They are not free from heat, instability, or loss, but they hold the places where recovery can begin to thicken. Along coastlines, moisture arrives with the air from the sea. Near rivers, water gathers long enough for plants to establish roots and for animals to return again and again to the same narrow corridors of shade and food. Around lakes, deltas, floodplains, and low coastal forests, life finds patches of continuity in a world where continuity has become rare. These are not lush sanctuaries in the later Mesozoic sense. They are refuges, and a refuge is not the same as a paradise. It is simply a place where the pressures of the wider world ease enough for survival to become possible. In the first Triassic landscapes, those small differences matter enormously. A slightly cooler valley, a damp soil bed, a strip of vegetation along a stream, or a coastal plain touched by seasonal rain can hold more living variety than the broad inland basins around it. The future does not return everywhere at once. It gathers first in margins, where water and shelter interrupt the rule of heat. Plants are among the first to show how slow this rebuilding must be. After the extinction, many terrestrial communities have been reduced, and the recovery of vegetation is uneven. In some places, seed ferns, conifers, horsetails, and other hardy plants persist, but the dense layered plant worlds of earlier times are diminished. A land animal depending on leaves, stems, roots, seeds, or tubers cannot simply wait for ecosystems to become generous again. It must feed on what remains. Near water, plants can anchor themselves more securely, and that anchoring begins a chain of consequences. Roots help hold soil. Soil retains moisture. Moisture supports more plant growth. More plant growth gives herbivores a reason to stay, and their presence begins to make predators possible again. None of this happens quickly. A floodplain may support a seasonal burst of life, then dry back into cracked mud. A coastal forest may offer shade and food, but only within a narrow reach before the land opens into harsher country. Still, compared with the inland deserts, these margins become the first places where ecological relationships can start to multiply. The survivors that use them do not yet form a rich world, but they begin to form a world with more than one path forward. Lystrosaurus remains the clearest emblem of this interval because its abundance is both impressive and unsettling. It is easy to describe its success as dominance, but that word can mislead. Dominance often suggests power over a thriving system. Lystrosaurus dominates because the system around it has been simplified. Its beak and skull are suited to cropping-resistant vegetation. Its body is low, strong, and practical rather than specialized for speed or display. Its tusks may have helped with digging or social behavior, and its limbs suggest an animal capable of moving through difficult ground and perhaps using burrows as shelter. In a marginal landscape, these traits become more valuable than elegance. Food may lie below the surface as roots or storage organs. Heat may be avoided by retreating underground. The most successful animal is not necessarily the most imposing one, but the one whose needs match what the wounded world can still provide. Lystrosaurus spreads across southern Pangaea so widely that its fossils now link places separated by modern oceans, reminding us that the continents of Africa, India, and Antarctica were then joined as parts of a single land. Its range is a biological map of supercontinental connection, yet its very abundance also records a narrowness in life. Where one genus becomes extraordinarily common, the missing variety around it becomes part of the story. Other synapsids survive as well, though many do so in reduced roles. The Dicynodonts, to which Lystrosaurus belongs, have endured the catastrophe better than many of their relatives, but the wider synapsid world has lost much of its former weight. The great Gorgonopsian predators are gone. Several therapsid lineages have vanished or persist only briefly. Cynodont, the group closest to the ancestry of mammals, continue in smaller bodies, often in forms that seem suited to hidden lives. Small size brings its own advantages. A smaller animal needs less total food, can use crevices and burrows, and can remain beneath the notice of larger competitors. It can feed on insects, small vertebrates, seeds, or scraps of plant matter unavailable to larger herbivores. In the early Triassic, smallness is not failure. It is a way of passing through a damaged interval without demanding too much from it. These small cynodonts and other survivors are not yet the mammals of later ages, but they are part of the long preparation that will eventually lead there. Their world is one of concealment, flexibility, and persistence near the edges of better watered ground. Amphibians also remain important in the wet places. Temnospondyls, ancient relatives of the amphibian line, have already passed through many Paleozoic changes, and some survive into the Triassic by holding close to water. Their broad skulls, aquatic habits, and dependence on moist environments make them natural inhabitants of rivers, lakes, and floodplains, where ponds persist, where channels cut through lowlands, and where seasonal floods leave pools behind. These animals can still hunt and reproduce. Their presence shows that the margins are not merely places where land animals drink. They are ecosystems in their own right, with aquatic prey, mud dwellers, insects, fish, and amphibious hunters. Yet even here, the instability of the climate places limits on what can flourish. A pool that lasts long enough in one season may fail in another. A river corridor may shift course. A humid refuge may shrink under prolonged drought. The animals tied most closely to water benefit from these spaces, but they are also trapped by them. Their survival depends on the persistence of habitats that the early Triassic climate does not always promise. Reptiles, especially diapsids, begin to take advantage of the same margins with increasing confidence. Some are small insect eaters moving through leaf litter and low vegetation. Others occupy the early steps toward larger herbivorous or predatory roles. They possess features that serve them well in dry and seasonal conditions, including protective skin and reproduction less dependent on standing water than that of amphibians. The shelled egg, already an older evolutionary achievement, matters greatly in a world where reliable wet nurseries cannot be assumed. Along the coasts and rivers, reptiles can feed, breed, and disperse without being as tightly bound to water for every stage of life. This freedom does not make them instantly dominant, but it gives them options. In the margins of Pangaea, options are the beginning of power, a lineage that can use shade when it is available, cross open ground when necessary, and reproduce away from ponds, can move through a fragmented landscape more effectively than one confined to a narrow set of conditions. The recovery of the early Triassic, therefore, has a patchwork character. In one place, Lystrosaurus may be common enough to make the land seem monotonous. In another, a small cynodont moves at the edge of vegetation. In a water channel, a temnospondyle waits under the surface. Nearby, early reptiles search through the ground cover, not yet ruling the world, but already gaining ground in the spaces between older lineages. Plants are not only background in this scene, they are the slow engineers of everything else. Every expansion of vegetation changes light, soil, humidity, and food. A few more stable plant communities can shelter invertebrates, and those invertebrates become prey for small vertebrates. Seeds, fronds, woody stems, and underground parts feed herbivores that then distribute nutrients and disturb soil. Each interaction begins modestly, but recovery is built from modest interactions repeated over great time. The Triassic world does not suddenly become full, it becomes less empty, and that difference is the first measurable step toward a new biosphere. What makes these refuges so important is that they hold both memory and possibility. They preserve traces of the Paleozoic survivors, especially the synapsids and amphibians that once belonged to older ecological orders. At the same time, they provide the conditions in which reptile lineages can begin to experiment with broader roles. The land is still too damaged for a stable new hierarchy, but not too damaged for trials. Some will fail as climates shift again. Some will remain marginal. Some will become ancestors to much larger stories. The quietness of these places is therefore deceptive. Along a riverbank or a damp coastal plain, the future is being sorted without spectacle. The animals are not yet gigantic. The forests are not yet vast. The dinosaurs are not yet visible as rulers. But the basic work has begun: soils holding, plants spreading, herbivores feeding, small predators returning, and lineages testing what this altered planet will allow. In the margins, the early Triassic stops being only an aftermath. It becomes a workshop, sparse and fragile, but active. The age to come will grow from these interrupted green places, where life first learns how to move beyond survival and begin, cautiously, to become complex again. The sea receives some of the Triassic survivors before the land is ready to offer them much ease. Along the margins of Pangaea, where rivers meet shallow coastal water and heat is softened by tides, the ruined world begins to open in another direction. The oceans have suffered terribly in the extinction. Reefs have been stripped back. Many bottom-dwelling communities have vanished or narrowed. Low oxygen and unstable chemistry have made large parts of the marine realm difficult for life, yet the sea also contains space, movement, and food webs that can rebuild in ways the desert interior cannot. Currents connect basins, coastlines gather nutrients, surviving fishes, ammonoids, bivalves, and other invertebrates begin to multiply wherever conditions improve. For reptiles standing at the edge of this recovery, the water becomes more than a boundary. It becomes an opportunity. Their distant ancestors had come from earlier land vertebrates, shaped by limbs, lungs, and eggs suited to life away from water. Now, in the early Triassic, several lineages begin moving back toward the sea, not as a return to some simple ancestral state, but as a new experiment forced forward by the conditions of a changed planet. The first steps are probably taken in the shallows. An animal does not become marine all at once. It feeds near water. Then in water, it rests on land but hunts among tides. Its limbs begin to serve swimming as well as walking. Its body becomes less tied to the ground and more shaped by resistance, buoyancy, and balance. In these coastal places, the pressures are different from those inland. Food can be concentrated in reefs, lagoons, mudflats, estuaries, and shellbeds. Small fish move through warm waters. Bivalves and other hard-shelled animals spread across the bottom. Ammonoids recover from their near disappearance and again become part of open marine food chains. The animals that can exploit these resources find a world still dangerous, but less starved than the land behind them. The sea does not remove the burden of the extinction. It changes the kind of burden that must be carried. Instead of drought and overheated ground, the problem becomes motion, salt, pressure, breathing, and the need to reproduce in a realm where bodies cannot simply lie down on a stable surface. Some Triassic reptiles remain close to shore and become specialists of the bottom. Placodonts are among the clearest examples of this coastal experimentation. Their bodies are heavy, their limbs not yet transformed into the open ocean tools of later marine reptiles, and their teeth often suited to crushing. In animals such as Placodus, the jaws and palate become part of a shell-grinding machine, able to break bivalves and other hard prey that many hunters cannot use. This is an important kind of success in a recovering world. It does not depend on chasing swift animals across open water. It depends on exploiting a resource that is abundant, protected, and difficult. Later, placodonts will become even more armored, some taking on shapes that recall turtles, despite not being turtles at all. That resemblance is not ancestry, but convergence, the repeated arrival at a similar solution under similar pressure. A broad, shielded body is useful when predators are present, and when life near the bottom rewards stability more than speed. In the early Triassic, the beginnings of that direction are already visible. Reptiles finding safety and food in a narrow zone between land and sea. Other forms explore stranger compromises. Tanistropheus, with its astonishingly long neck and relatively small head, belongs to one of the most distinctive body plans of the period. Its neck is not a gentle extension, but an extreme construction, built from lengthened vertebrae that make the animal look almost unbalanced. Yet in a shallow aquatic setting, such a form may have carried a quiet logic. A predator that can place its head near fish while keeping much of its body farther away may reduce the disturbance that would scatter prey. The long neck becomes a fishing tool, a way of separating the hunting end of the body from the mass that might frighten the target. It is not the only possible interpretation of its life, and fossils rarely preserve behavior directly. But the anatomy suggests a creature shaped by the edge habitats of the Triassic world, neither fully ordinary on land nor fully streamlined for the sea. Its oddness is not decoration. It is the record of an evolutionary trial at a time when many trials are being made. Farther from shore, another set of reptiles begins to solve the marine problem differently. Nothosaurs and their relatives become more active hunters. with elongated bodies, limbs useful in swimming, and interlocking teeth suited to holding slippery prey. They are not yet the great plesiosaurs of later seas, but they point toward that future. Their bodies still carry signs of compromise, able to move in water with increasing skill, while not entirely abandoning the older relationship with land. In them, the Triassic marine world shows an intermediate stage that is often easy to overlook. Evolution does not move from lizard to sea monster in a single leap. It passes through bodies that work well enough in two different realms, then gradually favor one realm more strongly. A nothosaur slipping through a coastal sea belongs to this middle condition. It is not a relic and not yet a later masterpiece. It is an animal adapted to a world where the boundaries between shore, lagoon, and open water are rich with possibility. The ichthyosaurs take the marine transformation farther. Early members of this lineage appear relatively soon after the extinction and begin one of the most dramatic radiations of the Triassic. Their bodies become streamlined, their limbs become paddles, and their movement increasingly belongs to the open water. Over time, some ichthyosaurs develop a shape that later observers often compare with dolphins or fast fishes, not because they are related to either, but because water imposes strict rules on any animal that must move quickly through it. A tapered body, a strong swimming stroke, and reduced drag become solutions repeated across deep time. In the earliest ichthyosaurs, the full later form is not yet complete, but the direction is unmistakable. They are reptiles becoming oceanic in a way few land vertebrates had achieved before. The most decisive step is not only locomotion, it is reproduction. An animal that must return to shore to lay eggs remains tied to coasts, no matter how well it swims. An animal that gives birth to live young can move into the open sea and stay there across its entire life. Fossils of ichthyosaurs and related marine reptiles show that live birth evolved in these lineages, freeing them from one of the strongest constraints inherited from land. That change alters geography. It allows a lineage to expand across marine space without needing beaches as nurseries. It makes the ocean not just a feeding ground, but a complete world. This is why the return of reptiles to the sea matters so deeply in the Triassic. It is not only a story of animals finding food after catastrophe, it is the beginning of a long Mesozoic marine order in which reptiles will become major predators. Diverse cruisers, shell crushers, and giants. The ocean is rebuilding, and these newcomers become part of that reconstruction from above, from the sides, and from the seafloor. Their rise also shows how extinction can create opportunity without making that opportunity gentle. The end Permian crisis removes many older marine players and leaves ecological space behind. But the space is not empty in a simple way. It is filled with unstable chemistry, damaged habitats, and the survivors of older systems struggling to recover. Reptiles entering the water must compete with fishes, sharks, ammonoids, and one another. They must solve the problem of salt balance, breathing at the surface, keeping orientation in moving water, and capturing prey in a medium far denser than air. Many experiments likely fail without leaving much trace. The ones that remain in stone are the successful fragments of a broader testing ground. Placodonts find the bottom, nothosaurs work the coastal hunting paths, ichthyosaurs begin to claim the open sea. Other lineages add their own variations, each one revealing that the Triassic is not merely recovering the past, it is inventing new versions of marine life from bodies that had once belonged to land. By the end of this early movement, the sea no longer looks like a refuge alone. It looks like a second beginning. While the interior of Pangaea remains hot and dry, and while terrestrial ecosystems rebuild slowly around narrow rivers and coastal vegetation, the marine realm is already assembling the outlines of a different Mesozoic grandeur. The greatest Triassic sea giants have not yet fully arrived, but the conditions that will allow them are being prepared. Food webs are strengthening. Reptile bodies are becoming more aquatic. Reproduction is loosening its bond to shore. The ocean, once nearly emptied, is gaining hunters unlike any that had ruled it before. The return to the sea is therefore one of the first signs that the Triassic will not simply be an age of survivors. It will be an age of departures from old limits, where life, having passed through its deepest wound, begins to discover that some of its futures lie not in reclaiming the land immediately, but in crossing back into the water and learning how to belong there again. The advantage of the archosaurs begins as a quiet imbalance rather than a sudden conquest. In the early Triassic, the land still carries many older survivors, especially synapsids, whose ancestors had been among the most powerful animals of the Permian. Yet the climate has changed the value of their strengths. A body that can produce much of its own heat has clear benefits in many worlds, but it also carries a steady cost. It must be fed. It must keep finding fuel even when plants are sparse. Prey is scarce, and the landscape is divided into hot open stretches and narrow refuges. In the damaged ecosystems after the Great Extinction, that cost becomes more difficult to pay. Reptiles with lower energy demands, tougher skins, and greater tolerance for long gaps between meals are not automatically superior in every setting, but in this particular world, they are well matched to the rules of survival. The early archosaurs arise within that wider reptile success, not yet as the only important animals on land, but as a lineage increasingly suited to the hard geometry of Pangaea, heat above, dry ground below, scattered food between them, and a future opening for any body plan that can move efficiently through scarcity. The word archosaur means ruling reptile, though at this stage the title is more prophecy than description. Archosaurs belong to the diapsid side of the amniote family tree, a broad reptile lineage distinct from the synapsids that eventually lead toward mammals. Their skulls carry openings behind the eyes that reduce weight and provide room for jaw muscles, and many of their bodies show changes in posture, breathing, and locomotion that become increasingly important through the Triassic. Early representatives are not all graceful or fast. Some are heavy-headed predators, built with deep skulls and powerful jaws. Others are smaller and more lightly made. What connects them is not one single lifestyle, but a set of anatomical possibilities. They are animals capable of spreading into the spaces left by extinction and then dividing those spaces among many experiments. In a recovering world, this is a crucial advantage. The first step toward dominance is not being the largest animal in the ecosystem. It is having enough flexibility for descendants to become many different kinds of animals when the ecosystem begins to widen. Among the early large predators, Erythrosuchus shows how quickly archosaurs and their close relatives begin to occupy roles once held by Permian hunters. Its skull is massive, its body heavy, and its presence in the fossil record suggests a land where serious carnivory is returning after a long interval of simplified food chains. It is not a dinosaur, and it is not a crocodile, but it stands near the broader archosaur story as a sign of changing power. A predator of this size requires more than its own anatomy. It requires enough herbivores, enough smaller animals, and enough ecological structure to support it. Its appearance means that the early Triassic world, though still wounded, is no longer only a place of endurance. It has begun to rebuild the conditions for pursuit, ambush, fear, and competition. The return of large hunters changes the lives of animals like Lystrosaurus and other herbivores that had spread during the emptier phase of recovery. A world with few predators allows blunt survival strategies to flourish. A world with renewed predation begins to test those strategies more harshly. At the same time, many synapsid groups continue to narrow. Some therapsids vanish soon after the beginning of the period. Others persist in smaller, more hidden forms. Cynodonts survive by becoming flexible, often modest in size, and probably active in sheltered conditions or at cooler hours. Their story is not one of failure, because they will carry mammalian traits forward with great consequence. But in the open ecological contests of much of Triassic Pangaea, they no longer hold the commanding place their relatives once held. The old Permian order has not merely been damaged, it has lost its centrality. Large dicynodonts remain important in some habitats, and Lystrosaurus has already shown what a synapsid survivor can do under extreme pressure. Yet the broader momentum is shifting. More reptile lineages are appearing in larger bodies, faster bodies, armored bodies, aquatic bodies, and predatory bodies. The land is becoming reptile-rich in a way that will define the Mesozoic. The archosaurs are part of this widening, but they are also beginning to surpass it, because their descendants will not remain confined to one pattern. Climate helps explain why this shift becomes possible. Much of the Triassic remains warm, and in warm conditions, a reptile can maintain activity without spending as much internal energy on body heat as a mammal-like animal would. This does not mean Triassic reptiles were simple cold machines. The old division between cold-blooded and warm-blooded can hide more than it reveals. Metabolism exists along a range, and many archosaurs likely occupied middle positions, with activity levels, growth rates, and body temperatures more complex than those of many modern lizards. Still, the energy equation matters. When food webs are rebuilding and plant productivity is uneven, lower daily energy needs allow a predator to wait longer, a herbivore to endure lean intervals, and a lineage to survive instability that might strain animals, requiring constant fuel. The archosaur advantage is therefore not only a matter of teeth and claws, it is a matter of cost, timing, and fit. Their bodies fit a world where sunlight is abundant, shade is valuable, and meals cannot always be assumed. Posture adds another layer to the story. Many early reptiles sprawl with limbs held out to the sides, a body plan that works well for some forms but can limit sustained movement. In archosaurs and their relatives, limbs increasingly shift toward a more upright position beneath the body. This change is gradual and uneven, but its consequences are large. A more erect stance can support larger body size, longer strides, and more efficient movement over land. It allows an animal to carry its weight differently, to breathe and walk with less interference, and to become either a more effective hunter or a more mobile herbivore. In open or seasonally dry landscapes, movement matters. Water may be far away, food patches may be scattered, a predator may need to cover distance between prey, a herbivore may need to migrate along river corridors or shift between plant communities as seasons change. The upright trend does not create dominance by itself, but it gives archosaurs a mechanical foundation that later branches will refine in very different directions. From that foundation, the archosaur family begins to split into futures that will seem, much later, almost incompatible. One side leads towards pseudosuchians, the broader crocodile line, which in the Triassic includes far more than the low, river-dwelling crocodilians familiar from the modern world. Many pseudosuchians become active land animals, armored herbivores, towering predators, and agile forms moving through environments where true crocodiles have not yet taken their familiar role. The other side leads toward avimetatarsalians, the birdline archosaurs, including the ancestors of dinosaurs and pterosaurs. During this part of the Triassic, the pseudosuchian side holds much of the visible power. Large predators and heavily built forms occupy roles that later generations may associate with dinosaurs. The future birdline is often smaller, quicker, and less dominant. That contrast is important because it corrects the simple image of dinosaurs rising at once into rule. The first dinosaur relatives do not inherit an empty throne. They grow in the shadow of other archosaurs already using the world with formidable success. In the Middle Triassic, animals such as Euparkeria and other small archosauriforms show the kind of transitional possibility that makes this period so consequential. Light bodies, relatively long limbs, and flexible locomotion suggest creatures able to move quickly through broken habitats, perhaps shifting between running, hiding, and opportunistic feeding. These animals are not the final answer to the Triassic landscape. They are part of the question becoming more refined. What kind of body works best when the land is hot but recovering, when vegetation is spreading but not everywhere, When predators are returning, and when competition begins to sharpen after millions of years of low diversity, some answers become large and forceful, some become armored, some become aquatic ambush hunters, some become small and fast. The Archosaur lineage is powerful because it does not settle on one answer. It generates a field of answers, and the Triassic becomes the testing ground in which those answers compete. This shift does not erase the older survivors immediately. Dicynode continue. Cynodonts continue. Amphibians continue in wet places. Marine reptiles are building another world offshore. But on land, the center of gravity is moving. The damaged post-extinction ecosystems have favored durability, efficiency, and flexibility, and archosaurs possess these in combinations that become increasingly decisive. As plant communities expand and herbivores diversify, archosaur predators have more prey to pursue. As rivers and floodplains become more important, archosaur lineages will move toward the water. As open habitats demand speed and endurance, other branches will become lighter and more upright. The dynasty is not yet complete, and the dinosaurs are not yet its most powerful members, but the underlying transformation is already underway. The early Triassic began with survival under a thin sky of scarcity. Now, within that scarcity, a new architecture of dominance is forming. The archosaurs are not simply replacing the old world. They are learning how to use the new one. And once that lesson takes hold, the rest of the period will unfold beneath their lengthening shadow. Water in the Middle Triassic is not only a relief from the dry land around it, it is a point of convergence, and convergence changes the meaning of danger. In a broad continental world where rainfall is uneven and vegetation follows moisture, rivers become the places where bodies must eventually gather. Herbivores come to drink and feed on the plants rooted in damp ground. Small reptiles and amphibians search the banks for insects, fish, eggs, and carrion. Predators follow the movements of everything else. The river is therefore not a peaceful line through the landscape, but a compressed ecosystem where need draws animals into range of one another. This is one of the quiet turning points in the recovery of Triassic life. Once enough plants have returned near water, and once enough herbivores depend on those green corridors, a new hunting strategy becomes possible with unusual force. A predator no longer has to search the dry interior endlessly for prey. It can wait where thirst makes avoidance difficult. The water's edge becomes a trap built not by intention, but by ecology. The oldest large masters of this setting are not crocodiles, though many later animals will make the comparison difficult to avoid. Temnospondyle amphibians have already survived from older worlds, and some Triassic forms become enormous ambush predators in rivers, lakes, and floodplains. Mastodonsaurus stands among the most imposing of them, with a broad flattened skull, eyes placed high, and jaws suited to seizing prey from the water. Its body suggests a hunter that spends much of its life submerged or partly hidden, using the surface as a boundary between concealment and attack. For animals approaching a riverbank, the danger may be almost invisible until movement breaks the water. This strategy is ancient in its simplicity. The predator does not need to run down prey across open ground. It allows the environment to deliver prey to the edge. In a world still recovering from extinction, such efficiency matters. Large amphibians tied to water can thrive where aquatic food webs are strong and where land animals must keep returning to drink. Their success shows that the wet margins of Pangaea are not merely refuges for the vulnerable. They are also places where old lineages can still become powerful. Yet the amphibian hold on the waterways is not secure. Their strength depends on the persistence of wet habitats, and the Triassic remains a world of shifting moisture. Amphibians still carry reproductive and physiological ties to water more tightly than many reptiles do. Their eggs and early life stages require aquatic or damp conditions, and their skins leave them more exposed to drying than the tougher coverings of reptiles. These limits do not prevent success in rivers and lakes, but they make that success conditional. As climates fluctuate, The line between advantage and confinement can become thin. A massive temnospondyle may rule a channel, but it cannot easily rule far beyond the channel. It is powerful inside the wet corridor and less certain outside it. This distinction matters because archosaurs are beginning to explore the same ecological space with bodies that are less bound to water at every stage of life. The river, once a stronghold for older amphibian predators, becomes part of a wider contest as reptiles learn to use the same ambush logic while retaining more freedom across the land. Phytosaurs are the most striking sign of that change. They look so much like crocodiles at first glance that they seem almost to have arrived from the wrong age. With long jaws, heavy bodies, armored backs, and a life spent close to rivers. But phytosaurs are not crocodiles. They are archosaur relatives on a separate branch, converging on a similar form because water ambush imposes a similar design. A long, narrow snout is useful for snapping at fish or seizing animals near the bank. Armor protects the body in contests and close encounters. A low profile allows concealment. Eyes and nostrils positioned for life near the surface help the animal breathe and watch, while most of the body remains hidden. In phytosaurs, the nostrils sit far back near the eyes rather than at the end of the snout. A small anatomical detail that reveals how resemblance can conceal deep difference. They are not ancestors of crocodiles performing an early version of a later role. They are another Triassic experiment, successful in its own time, filling rivers with a danger that would later vanish and be replaced by something only superficially similar. Proterochampsids and other crocodile-like archosauriforms add still more complexity to these waterside ecosystems. The repeated emergence of low-slung aquatic or semi-aquatic predators during the Triassic suggests that the opportunity was powerful. The environment kept asking the same question in different regions and lineages. What kind of body can make a living where land animals must approach water and aquatic prey move through channels below? Several groups answered in ways that resemble one another because the demands were shared. This is convergent evolution at a landscape scale. The river shapes jaws, eyes, limbs, armor, and behavior. It rewards patience, concealment, sudden force, and the ability to move between mud, bank, and current. The result is not one clean dynasty, but a crowded guild of ambush hunters, some amphibian, some reptilian, some closer to the crocodile line than others, all using the same unavoidable fact that no terrestrial animal can live without water. For herbivores, this creates a new kind of pressure. The recovery of plant life near waterways draws them inward, but the predators make that inward movement risky. Dicynodont, rhynchosaurs, allocotosaurs, early archosaur herbivores, and other plant eaters must balance feeding and drinking against exposure. A large animal may have strength and weight, but mud can slow it. A smaller animal may have speed, but the bank leaves little room for error. Herding behavior, alertness, timing, and route choice may all become important. Though the fossil record can only hint at such behavior indirectly, bones preserve wounds, trackways preserve movement, and depositional settings preserve the repeated association of animals with certain environments. The living moment itself is gone. Still, the logic of the ecosystem remains. Where water is scarce or concentrated, predation becomes more predictable. Where prey becomes predictable, predators can specialize. This feedback helps rebuild food webs after the long simplicity of the earliest Triassic. It also makes them more intense. A richer world is not necessarily a gentler one. Along these rivers, the land begins to recover some of the layered danger that mass extinction had stripped away. The water corridors also help larger animals spread. In the interior of Pangaea, rivers are not merely hazards. They are pathways through heat and dry ground. Vegetation follows them, and so do the animals that browse, graze, die, hunt, and nest among their banks. Seasonal floods can leave behind lakes, oxbows, and marshy flats where fish and amphibians multiply. Dry seasons can shrink those waters into crowded pools where competition becomes severe. The same river may be generous in one season and lethal in another. Such variation encourages flexible strategies. Some predators may move between channels as water levels change. Some herbivores may follow green growth across floodplains. Small animals may shelter in burrows during the hottest intervals, emerging when moisture returns. In this way, the rivers become engines of recovery, not because they are safe, but because they concentrate the resources that allow ecosystems to become more complex again. Complexity gathers first around water, and then radiates outward whenever climate permits. The rise of archosaurs along these margins deepens the transition already underway on land. Pseudosuchians, the crocodile-line archosaurs in the broad sense, will eventually become some of the most important animals of the Triassic. But their early success does not belong only to rivers. Some are terrestrial hunters. Some become armored herbivores. Some take on forms that later ages will not repeat. The water-adapted forms are only one part of a wider expansion. Yet they show how thoroughly archosaurs are beginning to enter ecological roles once held by other groups. When an archosaur predator waits in a river, and another stalks on land, and another lineage experiments with speed in the open, the meaning of archosaur advantage becomes clearer. It is not a single adaptation winning everywhere. It is a branching presence in many places at once. The Triassic world has room for amphibian giants, synapsid survivors, marine reptiles, and strange herbivores. But the archosaurs increasingly appear wherever the main flows of energy gather. They are at the banks. They are in the dry woodland. They are among the hunters. Soon enough, among the most agile small bodies moving through the background. By the time river ecosystems become crowded with ambush predators, the early Triassic stillness has truly passed. The world is no longer defined only by what survived. It is defined by interactions returning with force. A drink at the water's edge connects rainfall, plant growth, migration, hunger, and sudden attack. An animal stepping onto mud becomes part of a chain that reaches from roots in damp soil to teeth below the surface. These river systems do not yet belong to true crocodiles, and they do not yet belong to dinosaurs. They belong to an older, stranger Triassic order in which amphibian holdovers and archosaur experiments share the same narrow corridors of life. The danger gathered there is a sign of recovery, because danger of this kind requires enough life to sustain it. The water has become a meeting place, and in that meeting place, the next phase of the archosaur story is waiting. Smaller, quicker, and still easy to miss among the larger shadows along the bank. The first dinosaur shadows are difficult to see because they do not yet look like rulers. They move through the Triassic world as small bodies under larger powers. Light-framed animals crossing floodplains, dry woodland, and the edges of river systems where pseudosuchians hold the more obvious strength. In the broad archosaur family, the branch that will one day lead to dinosaurs and birds begins with creatures that seem almost modest beside the armored herbivores. Massive amphibians, phytosaur, and heavy-jawed predators around them. Their importance lies not in size, but in proportion. Limbs lengthen, ankles become more precise, bodies rise higher above the ground, movement becomes quicker, more economical, and more ready for sudden shifts of direction. These animals are not yet the great sauropods of later plains, or the giant theropods of later forests. They are the quieter architecture before those forms exist, the small mechanical changes that make later expansion possible. In a world where danger gathers along water and where open habitats demand speed, the future dinosaur line begins by learning how to move. The group at the center of this transition is Avemeta tarsalia, the bird side of the archosaur split. The name refers in part to the ankle and foot, because the lower limb becomes one of the key regions where this lineage reveals its direction. A more upright posture places the legs more directly beneath the body, and that shift changes the relationship between weight, balance, and stride. For a small animal, The advantage may be agility. For a later large animal, it may be support. At first, the benefit appears in lightly built forms, able to run across uneven ground with less of the side-to-side motion seen in more sprawling animals. This matters in Triassic habitats where a quick retreat into cover, a fast dash after insects or small prey, or a narrow escape from a larger predator can determine survival. The early birdline archosaurs do not need to overpower the world. Their strategy is to avoid being caught by it. Smallness and speed form a kind of hidden strength. Marasuchus, Lagosuchus, Dromaeomeron, and animals like them suggest this intermediate world of slender limbs and quick bodies. They are not always easy to place with certainty, because the fossil record is broken and many remains are partial. Yet together they show that dinosaur origins were not a single clean moment. They were a cloud of close relatives, near relatives, and early experiments surrounding the base of the group. Some may stand just outside Dinosauria. Some may belong nearer the line than others. Some reveal combinations of traits that later become clearer in true dinosaurs. The uncertainty is not a weakness in the story. It is the shape one should expect from deep time. Evolution rarely leaves a sharp doorway. It leaves a sloping threshold, with many forms close to the edge and only some passing into the long future. The earliest dinosaur relatives occupy that threshold, living ordinary animal lives, while later observers ask which bones carry the first unmistakable signs of a dynasty. The world around them is still ruled mainly by other archosaurs. Pseudosuchians occupy the large predator roles in many places, and some herbivorous archosaurs are already heavily armored or deeply specialized. Rhynchosaurs and dicynodonts browse in great numbers where conditions favor them. Amphibians remain dangerous in the water. The small avemetatarsalia, therefore, inhabit a crowded system, not an empty stage. Their rise begins in the spaces between dominants. They may feed on insects, small vertebrates, eggs, carrion, or plant material. Depending on the animal and the setting, they may move through drier uplands where heavier predators are less effective, or through broken vegetation where speed and turning matter more than force. Some likely use their height and limb posture to scan, dart, and change direction with unusual efficiency. The important point is that they are not waiting passively for the world to hand them power. They are surviving by using a different kind of body, one tuned to mobility at a time when mobility can open small but durable niches. Silosaurids deepen the ambiguity of this early bird-line world. They look close to dinosaurs, and for a long time they have occupied a difficult place near the origin of the group. Some interpretations place them just outside true dinosaurs, while others have suggested they may be related to the earliest Ornithischian line, the branch that will later include horned dinosaurs, armored dinosaurs, and duck-billed forms. Their bodies are often lightly built, with long limbs and skulls that suggest varied feeding. Some may have been herbivorous or omnivorous, occupying ecological roles different from the small predatory image often attached to early dinosaur origins. That possibility matters because the dinosaur story does not begin with only meat-eating hunters. From near the beginning, the wider birdline contains experiments in diet, posture, and movement, even before the great later split becomes well represented in fossils. The ingredients of diversity are already present. The future is not a single narrow line marching toward one famous form. It is a branching set of possibilities hidden in small animals moving through Triassic undergrowth. One of the strongest pressures shaping these animals is the presence of larger archosaur predators. A lightly built creature in the middle Triassic cannot rely on armor or bulk. It must rely on awareness, acceleration, and perhaps behavior that keeps it away from the most dangerous places at the most dangerous times. This may have encouraged activity patterns different from those of some sun-dependent reptiles, especially if higher metabolisms were already emerging in the birdline. Evidence from bone growth, posture, and later descendants suggests that these animals were not simply sluggish, heat-driven forms. Their physiology may have allowed greater activity, faster growth, or more stable internal conditions than many other reptiles. The details remain debated, but the direction is important. A lineage that can be active, agile, and efficient across varying conditions gains options. It can forage longer. It can flee more effectively. It can use cooler hours. It can live in a world of larger enemies without meeting them on their own terms. The early stages of the pterosaur story also lie somewhere within this small, agile world, though the exact path remains one of the more difficult questions in Triassic paleontology. Pterosaurs appear later as the first vertebrates known to achieve powered flight, with wings made from a membrane, supported largely by an elongated fourth finger. But before flight, there must have been small archosaur relatives capable of climbing, leaping, grasping, or moving through complex environments where forelimbs and balance mattered in unusual ways. Scleromochlus has often been discussed in this context, a tiny animal with a light body and long limbs. Though its precise relationship to pterosaurs has been debated, whether it sits close to their ancestry or only near the broader region of it, the important feature is the same. The avimetatarsalian world was experimenting not only with running, but with new relationships between limb, body, and air. Before wings spread above the Mesozoic, the ground beneath them was occupied by small animals, testing the physical edges of movement. The earliest true dinosaurs emerge from this background without announcing themselves as a revolution. Their first forms are generally small to medium-sized, bipedal, and lightly built. They share a suite of features in the hips, limbs, and skull that distinguish them from close relatives. But in life, those distinctions may not have looked dramatic to the animals around them. A small early dinosaur passing through a Triassic floodplain is not yet the center of the ecosystem. It may be one more quick archosaur among several, yet its anatomy contains a future advantage. The hind limbs are placed beneath the body with increasing commitment. The hip socket opens in a way that permits a more erect stance. The tail helps balance the body during bipedal movement. The forelimbs are freed from carrying all of the animal's weight, allowing later lineages to modify them for grasping, display, reduction, or, in one distant branch, flight. These are quiet traits at first, but they are powerful because they can be elaborated in many directions. The first dinosaur shadows therefore belong to a stage before fame. They are part of a Triassic landscape where older survivors remain. Pseudosuchians dominate many visible roles, and the great ecological doors have not yet opened. Their success is measured in persistence, not conquest. Oh, they endure among larger predators, exploit small spaces, refine movement, and spread through a supercontinent whose climates keep changing. Some lines will disappear with little trace. Others will become the roots of saurischians and perhaps the elusive earliest ornithischians. Still others, close but outside the dinosaur line, will show how many neighboring experiments surrounded the origin of the group. What matters is that by this point the future has acquired a body plan, upright, balanced, mobile, and adaptable. It is not yet obvious that this design will reshape the land. It is simply present, moving quickly through the background, while the louder Triassic world continues around it. The shadows are small, but they have begun to lengthen. The Carnian rains arrive as a climate event, but their importance is biological. For millions of years, much of Pangaea has been organized around dryness, sparse vegetation, seasonal rivers, hard soils, and animals shaped by the need to endure long intervals of heat and thirst. Then, the pattern changes. Around the middle of the late Triassic, volcanic activity along the margins of the supercontinent begins adding new pulses of carbon dioxide and other gases to the atmosphere. A warmer atmosphere can hold more water vapor, and a stronger water cycle can move moisture farther and more forcefully than before. The result is not a simple world of endless rain falling without pause, but a long interval of repeated humid pulses, heavier monsoons, expanded wetlands, and flooded lowlands appearing across regions that had once been dry. This is the Carnian pluvial event, one of the most consequential climatic disturbances of the Triassic. It does not erase the supercontinent, and it does not remove heat from the world. Instead, it changes what heat does. Warmth that once helped deepen drought now helps drive rain, and the old desert order begins to loosen under clouds. In the rocks, the shift is visible as a change in the language of sediment. Earlier dry conditions often leave red beds, wind-worked sands, and soils marked by exposure. During the humid interval, many regions begin preserving signs of wetter ground coal layers, dark, organic, rich sediments, lake deposits, river systems, and plant remains that point toward more productive landscapes. Coal is especially revealing because it forms from plant matter accumulating in wet, low-oxygen environments where decay is slowed. Its return in Triassic sequences after long scarcity suggests that swamps and waterlogged forests spread widely enough to leave a geological signal. The world is not becoming a carboniferous swamp planet in any simple sense. But for a time, the dry interior of Pangaea is interrupted by an expansion of green, wet habitats. This matters because the early Triassic recovery has been held back not only by extinction, but by the physical difficulty of rebuilding ecosystems on a hot, dry supercontinent. When rain increases, many of those limits weaken. Plants can spread into places where they could not persist before. Rivers can connect habitats. Lakes can last longer. Soils can hold more life. Every change in water changes the possible shapes of the living world. The cause of the Carnian pluvial event is still studied, but large-scale volcanism is one of the strongest candidates. The eruptions associated with the Pangaea large igneous province, now represented in parts of western North America and nearby regions, appear to have released gases capable of altering climate over long spans. These eruptions do not need to resemble a single mountain exploding above a local valley. Large igneous provinces are planetary-scale disturbances, vast outpourings of basalt and volcanic gases that can affect atmosphere, oceans, and rainfall patterns far beyond the eruption sites. Carbon dioxide warms. Warming intensifies evaporation. More evaporation feeds greater precipitation, especially where monsoon systems are already shaped by an enormous landmass. Pangaea, with its wide interior and strong seasonal contrasts, is especially responsive to such changes. The same geography that once helped create dry extremes can, under a warmer and wetter atmospheric pattern, support powerful seasonal rains. The climate system does not become gentle, it becomes more energetic. Floods, erosion, and shifting river channels may accompany the new humidity. And for organisms adapted to dryness, water itself can become a disturbance. This is one of the subtleties of the Carnian interval. Rain sounds like relief, especially after the harshness of the early Triassic. But life is always adapted to the conditions that existed before the change. A lineage built for dry woodland, sparser browse, or seasonal scarcity may not benefit when its habitat turns into floodplain, swamp, or dense humid forest. Plants that thrive in arid soils may lose ground to moisture-loving competitors. Animals that feed on those plants may follow them into decline. Burrow systems may flood. Nesting sites may become unstable. Disease, parasites, and decay can change as humidity rises. Rivers that once served as reliable corridors may become wider, more unpredictable, or harder to cross. The Carnian rains, therefore, open opportunity while also closing older paths. This is why the event is associated with turnover in many groups. It is not always a sharp mass extinction in the same category as the end Permian or end Triassic crises, but it reshapes ecosystems deeply enough to alter the direction of evolution. The world becomes more generous, but not equally generous to all. For plants, the humid interval is transformative. Conifers, seed ferns, horsetails, and other groups expand or rearrange their ranges as wetter habitats spread. vegetation becomes denser in many regions. And with denser vegetation comes a richer base for food webs. More plant matter supports more herbivores. More herbivores support more predators. More leaf litter, wood, and damp soil support insects, fungi, small vertebrates, and decomposer communities that help cycle nutrients back into the ground. The rebuilding that began in narrow refuges now has a broader stage. In places that were once only marginally habitable, forested and swampy landscapes can develop for long enough to leave fossils. The effect is not merely an increase in greenery. It is an increase in ecological architecture. A dense plant community creates vertical space. From roots to ground cover to trunks and canopy, animals can live below, within, and above that structure. Some browse low vegetation, some climb, some hide, some hunt along the edges of water. The forest multiplies the number of ways an animal can make a living. Rhynchosaurs become one of the most striking herbivore success stories during this wetter phase. With beaked skulls, powerful jaws, and teeth adapted for processing tough plant matter, they spread widely and become extremely abundant in some carnian communities. Their bodies are low and sturdy, and their feeding apparatus suggests animals able to exploit vegetation efficiently in the expanded plant worlds of the time. Like Lystrosaurus earlier, their abundance can make them seem almost emblematic of a particular ecological moment. But the comparison also reveals a difference. Lystrosaurus flourished in the thin aftermath of catastrophe, when survival itself was the main story. Rhynchosaurs flourish in a world becoming crowded again, where increased plant productivity allows certain herbivores to multiply on a large scale. Their success marks not emptiness, but renewed energy in the system. Yet, it may also make them vulnerable. A group tied strongly to the conditions of one climatic interval can decline when those conditions fade. The very traits that allow expansion during the rains may become less useful when the land dries again. Other animals also use the new wet landscapes in quieter ways. Amphibians find expanded aquatic habitats. Aquatic predators benefit from longer-lasting rivers and lakes. Archosaur lineages continue diversifying along banks, floodplains, and forests. Small avemetatarsalia gain access to more complex habitats where agility and varied diets are valuable. Early dinosaurs, still not dominant in most places, appear within this changing world and begin to spread through the connected landmass. Their rise should not be treated as a single effect of the Carnian rains. But the timing is important. Aveta, more productive Pangaea, creates openings for small, flexible, mobile animals that can exploit newly structured habitats. At the same time, some older, dry, adapted groups face stress. Ecological turnover does not hand dinosaurs an empire, but it helps make the world less fixed. In that loosened world, lineages with broad potential can begin to widen their range. The Carnian pluvial event also changes the emotional shape of the Triassic story. Until this point, the period has been marked by recovery under restraint life, surviving heat, rebuilding near water, and slowly restoring complexity after near ruin. With the rains, the planet's recovery becomes more visible, almost sudden by deep time standards. Forests spread, swamps return, herbivores multiply. Strange reptiles occupy branches, banks, lagoons, and forest floors. The Triassic begins to acquire its famous quality of experimentation, not because evolution has become careless, but because a richer environment can support more trials at once. When more niches exist, more unusual bodies can persist long enough to be preserved. The coming strangeness of the period grows out of this wet expansion. The rain does not create novelty by magic. It creates conditions in which novelty has room to survive. Still, the event carries a warning within its generosity. The same climate system that brings moisture has been driven by volcanic disturbance. And such disturbances rarely produce only one simple outcome. Warming, ocean change, rainfall shifts, erosion, and chemical stress can occur together. Marine ecosystems also respond. with changes in oxygen, nutrients, and carbonate chemistry affecting organisms that build shells or reefs. On land, the new humidity may stabilize some systems while destabilizing others. The Carnian world is therefore not a peaceful recovery scene. It is a dynamic interval in which life accelerates through opportunity and disruption at the same time. The old desert world is not merely watered, it is reorganized. In that reorganization, the Triassic becomes broader, stranger, and more fertile, but also more contingent. Many groups that rise in the rains will not define the later Mesozoic. Some will vanish as climates change again. Others will persist as thin threads. A few will carry the future quietly inside small bodies. The Carnian rains are a turning of the key rather than the opening of the final door. They release energy into ecosystems that had been waiting for more water, more plants, more structure, and more room. From those flooded forests and humid lowlands, the next world begins to assemble. Crowded with experiments that could only emerge once, survival was no longer the only demand. The forested Carnian world does not look like a settled kingdom. It looks like a long experiment conducted under warm rain, where old survivors, new reptiles, amphibians, and early mammal relatives all occupy a landscape that has suddenly become more layered than the dry world before it. On the ground, roots bind, wet soil and fallen plant matter accumulates in shaded hollows. Above that, fronds, conifers, seed ferns, and low-branching vegetation create cover, food, and vertical pathways. Along the channels, water spreads through swamps and seasonally flooded basins, carrying fish, amphibians, invertebrates, and the smell of decay through places that had once been open and dusty. This richer structure does not produce a single dominant form. It produces variety. And variety is what gives the Triassic its unusual texture. Many of the animals in these forests seem familiar only in fragments. One body suggests a lizard, another a crocodile, another a turtle, another a mammal, another something almost bird-like. Yet none belongs cleanly to the later categories that the modern mind wants to use. The Carnian forest is filled with lineages still testing the limits of form before the more famous patterns of the Jurassic have narrowed the view. Rhynchosaurs are among the most abundant plant eaters in many of these habitats, and their success gives the forest floor a particular weight. Their beaked mouths and powerful jaws are built for cropping and grinding vegetation, allowing them to use the expanding plant resources of the rainy world with great efficiency. Hyperodapodon and its relatives become common enough in some deposits to define entire communities. Sturdy herbivores moving through damp lowlands where plants have multiplied faster than many predators can fully control. Their bodies are not elegant by later dinosaur standards, but they match the moment. They are compact, durable, and well-equipped for a food supply that has become abundant but still tough. Around them, Dicynodonts continue their long persistence after the catastrophe that opened the Triassic. Some remain low and heavy, using beaks and tusks to feed near the ground. Others grow larger and take on the role of broad, steady browsers. They are not relics in the simple sense. They are active participants in this world, proof that old synapsid lineages can still occupy important herbivore roles even as archosaurs expand around them. Their presence gives the Carnian ecosystems a layered ancestry, with Paleozoic survivors sharing space with Mesozoic newcomers. Other herbivores add to the sense of evolutionary mixture. Allocotosaurs, including forms related to the striking Shringosaurus of earlier Triassic landscapes, show how reptile lineages outside the main dinosaur story also explored large plant-eating bodies. Some develop skull ornaments, heavy builds, and specialized feeding structures that make them difficult to place within familiar comparisons. A later relative such as Pteroterpiton shows a narrow, beaked skull and unusual teeth, suggesting a highly specific feeding style shaped by the changing plant world. These animals do not lead directly to the dominant herbivores of later ages. but they show how many possible herbivore designs were available during the Triassic. The future did not yet belong, obviously, to sauropodomorphs or ornithischians. It was still being negotiated among dicynodonts, rhynchosaurs, allocotosaurs, armored archosaurs, and early dinosaur relatives, each group taking part of the expanding vegetation and converting it into motion, body mass, and reproduction. Predators gather around this abundance in several forms. In the water, temnospondyle amphibians still hold their ancient power. Though many are smaller than the largest earlier river giants, their wide heads and aquatic habits make them effective hunters in pools, lakes, and channels where fish and small tetrapods pass too close. Phytosaurs become even more imposing along the banks. Long-snouted reptiles whose crocodile-like shape belongs entirely to their own vanished branch. In swampy environments, animals such as Van Cleaver add another kind of threat, with armored bodies and semi-aquatic habits that suggest a predator comfortable in the boundary between water and land. On firmer ground, Pseudoseuchian archosaurs continue to command much of the large predator space. Some remain four-footed, deep-skulled hunters with bodies built for strength. Others move toward more unusual forms, including poposauroids that stand and run on two legs with a profile, so dinosaur like that. Only anatomy reveals the deeper difference. This is one of the essential features of the Carnian forest. Many animals resemble future dynasties without belonging to them. The Triassic keeps producing echoes before the originals become dominant. The trees and low branches open another set of possibilities. As vegetation becomes more complex, animals can move upward, away from the feet and jaws of larger predators. Arboreal life rewards grasping limbs, balance, claws, light bodies, and sometimes display structures that make little sense on the open ground. Drepanosaurs are among the strangest inhabitants of this vertical world, with chameleon-like bodies, bird-like skull impressions in some reconstructions, powerful forelimb claws, and tails that may have been prehensile or tipped with specialized structures. They appear adapted for climbing in ways that few later reptiles repeat. Drepanosaurus itself carries a huge claw on the forelimb, perhaps used for digging into bark, tearing open insect nests, or anchoring the body while climbing. Hyperonecta has a deep, blade-like tail whose exact function remains debated, possibly related to balance, display, or movement through water or vegetation. These animals are not strange because evolution is random in any simple way. They are strange because small forest niches can reward precise, unusual solutions. In a world with many predators below, an odd body that works well in branches can become a workable body, even if it has no long future beyond the Triassic. Longisquama and related gliding or display animals make the canopy even harder to reduce to familiar terms. Longisquama is known for long structures rising from the back, features that have been interpreted in different ways and debated for their function. They may have served display, thermoregulation, or perhaps some aerodynamic role, though certainty remains difficult because fossils preserve shape more readily than behavior. Charovipteryx carries its own puzzle, with extraordinarily long hind limbs and membranes associated mainly with the rear of the body, suggesting gliding or at least some kind of aerial movement, unlike the wing plan of pterosaurs. These animals show the Carnian forest pressing life toward the air from below, not yet through the fully controlled, powered flight of pterosaurs, but through leaps, glides, membranes, and surfaces that turn falling into movement. The canopy is a laboratory of partial flight, display, and escape. Some experiments will end. One, in the pterosaurs, will become a lasting transformation of the vertebrate world. Beneath this reptile variety, small cynodonts and early mammalia forms continue their quieter work. They are not the most visible creatures in the forest, but their adaptations matter deeply. Small size allows them to use burrows, leaf litter, roots, and night conditions in ways larger reptiles cannot. Their differentiated teeth process food with increasing precision, separating, cutting, piercing, and grinding into different parts of the mouth. Their likely hair and elevated metabolism help them remain active when temperature and light conditions shift. In a forest crowded with archosaurs, amphibians, and strange arboreal reptiles, these mammal line relatives do not need to dominate. They need to persist, refine, and remain flexible. Their world may be filled with danger, but it also contains insects, seeds, small prey, and shelter. The same humid complexity that supports flamboyant reptile experiments also supports hidden lineages whose importance will not be fully visible for a very long time. The Carnian forest therefore becomes a meeting ground of futures, most of which will not survive to become familiar. That is why the Triassic can feel so alien. It preserves a time when many evolutionary answers were still open, and when later categories had not yet filtered the living world. Crocodile-line archosaurs could be land predators, armored herbivores, or bipedal runners. Reptiles could imitate turtles without being turtles, glide with hind limb membranes, climb with oversized claws, or wear elaborate structures whose meanings remain uncertain. Synapsids could be large tusked browsers or small nocturnal insect hunters. Amphibians could still be river monsters. Early dinosaurs could move through all of this as only one promising group among many. The forest is not chaotic. It is organized by food, water, predation, shelter, and reproduction like any ecosystem. But its organization is unfamiliar because so many of its solutions were temporary. Later extinctions will remove entire branches, making the surviving lines seem more inevitable than they were. In the Carnian, nothing yet has that inevitability. The wet world has given life room to become inventive, and the result is a landscape filled with bodies that seem to come from alternate histories of the planet. As the rains continue, this experiment reaches a kind of richness that the early Triassic could not have supported. Yet its very richness depends on conditions that will not last. The humid forests are a response to climate, and climate is already tied to forces deeper than any ecosystem can control. For now, the branches hold small climbers, the mud holds tracks, the rivers hide long jaws, and the undergrowth rustles with herbivores whose names will never echo like those of later dinosaurs. The Triassic has become abundant, but its abundance is unstable. In that instability, evolution produces some of its most unusual forms, not as mistakes, but as temporary successes in a world briefly wide enough to allow them. The first dinosaurs do not enter the Triassic world as giants. They appear as one more agile branch among many archosaurs, walking through ecosystems already filled with powerful competitors. Older herbivores, river ambush hunters, armored forms, and strange forest specialists. Their beginning is quiet because their earliest advantage is not overwhelming force. It is a combination of balance, posture, lightness, and possibility. A true dinosaur carries the body more directly over the hips, with hind limbs set beneath the trunk and a gait that allows efficient forward movement. The hip socket is open, the legs are arranged for an erect stance, and the tail becomes part of a counterbalance system behind a body increasingly committed to bipedal motion in many early forms. These details are not dramatic in the way a huge skull or a row of armor is dramatic, but they matter because they change what later bodies can become. The earliest dinosaurs inherit the small, quick architecture of their avimetatarsalian relatives and begin turning it into something more stable, more versatile, and more capable of expansion. In the Carnian and later Triassic landscapes, the first clear dinosaur communities are especially well known from rocks in what is now South America. Though Pangaea's connected land allows related animals and close relatives to spread across wide regions, Eoraptor, Herrerasaurus, Saturnalia, and their neighbors belong to a world in which dinosaurs are present, active and diversifying, but not yet ruling the land. Eoraptor is particularly useful because it resists a simple category. Its name suggests a hunter, and it certainly has a light body and grasping hands that fit the image of a small, active animal. But details of its teeth and skull have led many researchers to consider it omnivorous or near the early sauropodomorph line. That ambiguity is valuable. It shows that early dinosaurs were not already divided into the familiar roles of later ages. The same small body plan could explore meat, plants, insects, eggs, and mixed diets, while the larger ecological structure around it remained unsettled. At the dawn of the group, identity is still flexible. The great split within dinosaurs eventually produces two major branches, Saurischia and Ornithischia, often described by differences in hip structure, though the names can be misleading when compared with birds. The Saurischian side becomes much easier to see in the Triassic fossil record. It includes the line leading to theropods, the mostly carnivorous dinosaurs that will much later include birds, and the line leading to sauropodomorphs, the long-necked herbivores that will eventually produce the largest land animals in Earth history. The Ornithischian side is far more elusive at this early stage. Later, it will give rise to armored dinosaurs, horned dinosaurs, duck-billed dinosaurs, and many other plant-eating forms. But in the Triassic, its earliest record is faint and debated. Some animals near the base of the bird line, archosaurs, especially silosaurids, may help illuminate that missing side, either as close relatives just outside Dinosauria or as forms connected in some way to the earliest Ornithischian radiation. The uncertainty gives the dawn of dinosaurs a soft edge. One half of the later story is present mostly as absence, inference, and scattered anatomical hints. On the Saurischian side, however, the Triassic begins to show clearer experimentation. Early theropods and their close relatives refine the bipedal predatory body, narrow skulls, recurved teeth, grasping forelimbs, and hind limbs suited to running. Their size remains modest compared with the largest pseudosuchian predators, but their movement and metabolism may give them a different niche. A small theropod does not need to challenge a Rauisuchian for control of a carcass or a riverbank. It can pursue smaller prey, feed opportunistically, move through broken vegetation, and use speed where weight would be a disadvantage. Animals such as Tawa and Coelophysis, from slightly later in the Triassic, show how this line becomes more recognizable: slim, quick, balanced, and lightly built, with a body plan that can be repeated and refined across the supercontinent. They are not yet tyrants of the land. They are mobile predators living beside larger crocodile-line archosaurs, and their success lies in not needing the same role. Herrerasaurs complicate the picture because they look, at first glance, like early theropods made larger and more formidable. Herrerasaurus and its relatives are among the first dinosaurs to move into a more serious predatory role, with strong hind limbs, grasping hands, and skulls built for flesh. For a time, they sit higher in the food chain than most other dinosaurs, suggesting that the group was capable of producing significant hunters early in its history. Yet even here, the Triassic refuses simplicity. The exact position of Herrerasaurs within the dinosaur family tree has been debated, with different studies placing them near theropods, near the base of Saurischians, or close to the root of Dinosauria itself. Their anatomy carries a mixture of primitive and more specialized features, which is precisely what makes them important. They belong to the threshold period, when dinosaur lineages are separating but have not yet settled into the cleaner patterns visible later in life. They may have been among the most impressive dinosaurs of their ecosystems. Sauropodomorphs begin from humbler bodies, but their future is already visible in the direction of their change. Early forms such as Saturnalia are small compared with their Jurassic descendants, but they show the first steps toward a plant-eating lineage that will eventually transform terrestrial ecosystems. Moving toward herbivory is not simply a matter of choosing leaves instead of meat. Plants are abundant but difficult. Their tissues can be tough, fibrous, chemically defended, and poor in easily available energy compared with animal flesh. A body that depends increasingly on plants must process large volumes of food, hold it long enough for digestion, and often rely on internal fermentation or mechanical breakdown. Early sauropodomorphs begin solving these problems through longer necks, larger bodies, changes in teeth, and, in some forms, the swallowing of small stones known as gastroliths, which may have helped grind food within the digestive tract. This line does not become gigantic immediately. It begins by widening the range of what dinosaurs can eat, then gradually increases size as plant consumption becomes more central to its success. By the late Triassic, sauropodomorphs such as Plateosaurus show how quickly that direction can intensify. These animals are far larger than the first small dinosaur forms, often walking on two legs, but with bodies already heavy enough to suggest a transition toward the massive quadrupedal herbivores of later times. Their long necks allow feeding across a broader vertical range. Their bodies can process more vegetation, and their abundance in some regions shows that dinosaurs have begun to claim important herbivore roles. This is one of the first visible expansions of dinosaur power. But even it does not mean the group has taken over the planet. Large dicynodonts still exist. Rhynchosaurs remain important during parts of the Triassic. Armored pseudosuchians and other reptile herbivores share the landscape. The sauropodomorph rise is therefore not a clean replacement. It is an insertion into an already crowded herbivore world. Followed by gradual enlargement and spread, the dinosaur advantage grows through persistence inside complexity, not through sudden emptiness. The connectedness of Pangaea helps these early dinosaurs disperse, but it also exposes them to competition across vast distances. Without oceans dividing the land, successful lineages can move far, yet so can their rivals. A dinosaur body plan that works in one basin may spread into another, but it must still encounter local climates, plant communities, predators, and older herbivores. This helps explain why the Triassic dinosaur record feels uneven. In some places, dinosaurs become more common or larger. In others, pseudosuchians and other groups continue to dominate the most obvious roles. Regional environments determine how much opportunity is actually available. The dawn of dinosaurs is therefore geographically broad but ecologically patchy. Their future is present everywhere as potential. But potential does not always become power at the same pace. The most important fact about this stage may be that dinosaurs are learning to be many things before they become the main thing. Small predators, omnivores, large browsers, possible early members of hidden herbivore lines, and formidable heterosaurs all exist within the same general interval. This variety gives the group resilience. If one diet becomes difficult, another lineage may persist. If one body size is limited by competition, another may exploit a different niche. If climate shifts, mobility, metabolism, growth rate, and reproductive strategies may allow some branches to pass through disruption better than their rivals. None of this guarantees dominance, but it prepares the group for a world in which dominance may become available. In the Carnian and late Triassic, dinosaurs are still living beneath the heavy shadow of crocodile-line archosaurs, yet that shadow does not prevent them from changing. It may even sharpen them, keeping early dinosaur lineages mobile, efficient, and flexible in a world where the largest roles are already defended. The quiet dawn of the dinosaur age is not a coronation. It is a long adjustment of bodies inside crowded ecosystems, a gradual widening of diet and size, and a hidden accumulation of advantages. The later Mesozoic will make dinosaurs seem inevitable, but here, among the Triassic forests, floodplains, and drylands, they are only one experiment among many. Their difference is that this experiment will outlast most of its rivals. The first powered wings of the vertebrate world do not rise from a quiet sky. They rise above a Triassic landscape already crowded with danger below phytosaurs in the water, pseudosuchians on the ground, early dinosaurs moving through the undergrowth, and older survivors still feeding among the plants. Flight enters this world as a new dimension of escape and opportunity. Before pterosaurs, insects had owned the air for immense spans of time, and some small vertebrates may have glided from trees or slopes, using membranes to slow a fall or extend a leap. But powered flight is different. It requires the body to generate lift, control direction, and return to the air again by its own muscular effort. The earliest known pterosaurs appear with that transformation already achieved, as if the crucial steps before them are hidden behind a curtain of missing fossils. Their bones are light, their skulls are long, their wings are built from skin and muscle, stretched along an enormously lengthened fourth finger. Their bodies are not birds, and they are not bats. They are a separate solution to the same physical problem, arriving much earlier than either, during an age when the land itself still belongs mostly to other archosaurs. The anatomy of a pterosaur is one of the great Triassic departures from ordinary reptile form. The wing is not made from feathers, and it is not a simple flap of skin between long fingers. A single finger becomes the main spar, holding a membrane that likely extends back toward the body and hind limb, supported by fibers that help stiffen and shape the wing surface. The shoulder and chest have to manage the forces of flapping. The bones become thin-walled without losing the strength needed to resist bending. The neck, head, and tail all take part in balance. Some early pterosaurs have long tails, pointed teeth, and relatively modest wingspans, suggesting quick, maneuverable animals feeding on insects, fish, or small prey along coasts, lakes, and forested margins. Eudimorphodon, one of the best-known late Triassic pterosaurs, carries complex teeth that may have helped it seize fish, while other early forms show variations on the small predatory flyer. They are not yet the gigantic silhouettes of later Mesozoic skies. They are the first workable designs, built for a world where the air has become a new habitat for vertebrate life. Their origins remain difficult because the fossil record begins too late to show every step. Pterosaurs appear suddenly in terms of preserved anatomy, with wings already elaborate and flight already functional. That does not mean they evolved suddenly in life. It means the earlier stages have been poorly preserved or not yet found. Small, lightly built animals living in forests, uplands, or delicate environments are less likely to fossilize than large bodies buried in floodplains. The lineage leading to pterosaurs may have passed through climbing, leaping, or gliding forms whose bones were easily destroyed before burial. Close relatives among small avemetatarsalia suggest that agility, upright limbs, and elevated activity levels were already present in the broader family. Some debated Triassic animals, such as Scleromochlus, have been considered possible windows into this neighborhood of the family tree, even when their exact positions remain uncertain. What matters most is that powered flight emerges from the same archosaur branch that also produces dinosaurs. The bird-line archosaurs split into one path that stays on the ground and another that enters the air, and both begin as relatively small, mobile bodies using lightness in different ways. Flight gives pterosaurs access to food and safety unavailable to most ground animals. They can cross water, cliffs, forest gaps, and broken terrain. They can feed along shorelines without needing to remain on the bank. They can nest or rest in places harder for terrestrial predators to reach. Though the details of early pterosaur nesting remain uncertain, they can follow insects over wetlands or fish above shallow waters, using sight and maneuverability to harvest a layer of the ecosystem that had been mostly closed to backboned animals. This does not make their lives easy. Flight is demanding, and a flying body is full of compromises. Wings can be injured. Light bones can break. A membrane must remain intact. Takeoff requires strength, timing, and space. Yet once the design works, the reward is enormous. The sky becomes not an empty background above the Triassic, but a living zone, a place where archosaur evolution has quietly escaped the two-dimensional contests of land and water. While pterosaurs expand upward, Another revolution is taking place much closer to the ground. The mammal line has not disappeared after the decline of many larger synapsids. It has changed scale. Cynodonts continue through the Triassic in bodies that are often small, low, and easily overshadowed by the reptiles around them. But inside that smallness, their anatomy is becoming more precise. The skull changes, the jaw joint shifts, teeth become differentiated into incisors, canines, premolars, and molars, giving the mouth separate tools for seizing, cutting, puncturing, and grinding. This is more than a dental detail. Teeth determine diet, and diet determines the ways an animal can use a habitat. A reptile with many similar teeth may seize and swallow food effectively, but a mammal-like mouth can process food before it reaches the stomach, extracting more from insects, small prey, seeds, or tough morsels. In a world where larger animals dominate the obvious spaces, precision becomes a way to live in the overlooked ones. Megazostrodon and Morganucodon stand near this threshold, often described as mammalia forms rather than fully modern mammals, because they retain some ancestral traits while showing many features associated with the mammalian direction. They are small, shrew-like animals in general shape, likely active, alert, and dependent on frequent feeding. Their jaws and teeth suggest refined processing of insects and other small foods. Their bodies were probably insulated with hair, a feature inherited from deeper synapsid history and tied to heat retention, sensory function, and perhaps social or reproductive biology. A small body loses heat quickly, especially during cooler nights, and insulation helps make nocturnal activity more practical. Nocturnality may have been one of the great quiet strategies of the early mammal line, when the larger reptiles were most active under warmth and light. Small cynodonts and mammalia forms could exploit darkness, cooler air, and sheltered routes through leaf litter and burrows. Night becomes a refuge, as real as any physical hole in the ground. The shift toward mammalian hearing is another hidden transformation. In synapsid evolution, bones once involved in the jaw gradually become associated with the middle ear, improving sensitivity to sound. In early mammalia forms, this transition is not always complete in the modern sense, but the direction is extraordinary. A small nocturnal animal benefits from hearing faint movement in darkness, an insect under leaves, a predator nearby, a mate calling from cover, young stirring in a nest. Sensory refinement changes the animal's relationship with the world. The Triassic night is not empty. It is full of signals that large daylight hunters may ignore. Smell, touch, hearing, whisker-like sensory structures, and precise teeth all work together in a smaller ecological theater. The mammal line does not need to become large to become complex. It becomes complex while remaining small. Burrowing deepens that strategy. Underground spaces, moderate temperature, preserve humidity, and provide protection from many predators and climate extremes. For small cynodonts and mammalia forms, burrows can serve as shelters, nesting spaces, and daytime refuges. The Triassic world, with its shifting wet and dry phases, rewards animals that can retreat from surface conditions when necessary. A burrow does not remove danger, but it narrows it. It allows a small body to control part of its environment in a way that open ground never permits. This kind of control may have supported parental care, another key feature associated with the mammalian lineage. Though direct evidence is difficult to secure for every early form, milk production likely has deep origins before true mammals, perhaps beginning as secretions that helped nourish or protect eggs and young. By the time the mammal line becomes more clearly defined, reproduction and care are already moving toward the intimate, energy-rich strategies that later mammals will elaborate. The contrast between pterosaurs and mammalia forms is striking because both succeed by leaving the main battlefield without truly leaving the ecosystem. Pterosaurs go upward, turning air into territory. Mammalia forms go downward and into darkness, turning small spaces and night into opportunity. Both paths depend on elevated activity, insulation or body covering, sensory refinement, and a willingness of evolution to solve problems through reduction as much as enlargement. Neither group dominates the Triassic land in the obvious sense. A pseudosuchian predator is more imposing. A large dicenodont is more visible. A sauropodomorph browser is heavier and more landscape-shaping. Yet the pterosaurs and mammalia forms carry transformations that will outlast many larger Triassic dynasties. One opens the sky to backboned flight. The other preserves the mammalian future through small, warm bodies moving beneath roots and stars. In the same age that early dinosaurs are finding their footing, these two quieter revolutions show that the Mesozoic is not being shaped along one path alone. The dawn of dinosaurs is also the dawn of flying archosaurs and nearly mammalian night dwellers. The world is expanding in height, depth, and time of day. Life is no longer only rebuilding after catastrophe. It is dividing the planet into new layers of possibility. The late Triassic Sea holds a different kind of grandeur from the forests and riverbanks of Pangaea. On land, the age is crowded with strange experiments tied to one immense continent. Offshore, in the broad waters of the Panthalassic Ocean and the long margins of Tethys, another recovery is reaching a larger scale. The end Permian extinction had damaged marine life almost beyond comparison, breaking reefs, thinning seafloor communities, and pushing many lineages close to disappearance. Yet water connects places that land divides, and over tens of millions of years, the sea begins to rebuild its depth of relationships. Plankton, algae, small invertebrates, fishes, ammonoids, sharks, and marine reptiles enter new arrangements. Reefs return in places. Shell beds thicken. Predators become larger. The ocean is no longer only a place where survivors endure. It has become an arena where size, speed, armor, and pursuit can grow to forms the land has not yet matched. Placodonts remain close to the shore, where the bottom itself provides much of their food. In earlier forms, the placodont body is already heavy and specialized, with crushing teeth able to break shells and hard prey. By the late Triassic, some members of the group have carried protection to a striking extreme. Hinodus and Placocheles resemble turtles strongly enough to mislead the eye, with broad armored bodies and shell-like coverings. But they are not turtles. They belong to a separate marine reptile line that has reached a similar answer through similar pressures. A shell is useful when the animal moves slowly, feeds near the bottom, and lives among predators that might otherwise seize it whole. A broad shield also makes the body harder to swallow and harder to break. These placodonts show that the Triassic Sea is not only rewarding speed, it is rewarding defense, persistence, and the ability to harvest food hidden in sediment or locked inside shells. Along lagoons and shallow coastal shelves, they turn the seafloor into a feeding ground, armored against a world becoming more dangerous above them. Farther out, ammonoids become one of the great pulses of renewed life. Their coiled shells, chambered interiors, and jet-propelled movement had already carried them through earlier crises. Though often by a narrow margin, after the end Permian collapse, they radiate again, filling seas with forms that serve as both predators and prey. To later geologists, ammonoids will become guides through time because they evolve quickly and preserve widely. But in the Triassic Ocean they are living animals, moving through water columns, seizing small prey, and feeding larger hunters in turn. Bivalves, gastropods, crustaceans, and other invertebrates spread through coastal and shelf environments. Reef communities begin to regain structure, though they do not simply recreate the lost Paleozoic reefs. They assemble new partnerships and new builders. Corals return as important architects, creating surfaces, crevices, and shelter for other organisms. The rebuilding of reefs matters because a reef is not just an organismal colony. It is habitat made by life itself. a structure that multiplies the number of lives a shallow sea can hold. Fishes also diversify within this strengthening marine world. Ray-finned fishes become increasingly important, using streamlined bodies, yaws, and fins in ways that will make them one of the most successful vertebrate groups in later oceans. Hybodont sharks continue as durable predators, not identical to modern sharks, but already part of a long cartilaginous lineage, able to survive repeated disruptions. Smaller fishes feed on plankton, invertebrates, and one another. Larger fishes become prey for reptiles moving farther into open water. The food web thickens layer by layer. Energy begins with microscopic producers and small drifting organisms, then passes upward into shelled animals, fishes, sharks, and marine reptiles. The more complete that ladder becomes, the larger the top predators can grow. Giant bodies require not only evolutionary opportunity, but a sea productive enough to feed them. By the late Triassic, that condition exists. The ichthyosaurs are the clearest expression of it. Early in the period, their ancestors had already begun the movement back into the sea, reshaping reptile bodies into streamlined swimmers and freeing reproduction from the shore through live birth. Over time, some lineages push size to extremes. Shonisaurus, Shastasaurus, Himalayasaurus, and related giants reveal a marine reptile radiation that reaches whale-like proportions long before whales exist. Their bodies are not all built in the same way, and not all giant ichthyosaurs were necessarily the same kind of predator. Some have long bodies and relatively reduced teeth. Others show skulls and jaws, suggesting active predation on sizable prey. The details remain debated, but the scale is undeniable. In the late Triassic, some ichthyosaurs become among the largest animals Earth has ever supported up to that time. Their rise changes the emotional meaning of the sea. The Mesozoic giants most often remembered may be dinosaurs on land, but the first truly vast reptile bodies belong to the ocean. Size in water follows different rules than size on land. Buoyancy supports mass that legs would struggle to carry. A body can become enormous without needing pillars of bone beneath it, but it must still move, breathe, hunt, and reproduce. For ichthyosaurs, streamlining reduces drag. Powerful tails drive motion, and flipper-like limbs steer through the water. The comparison with dolphins or whales is useful only to a point. Ichthyosaurs are reptiles, with their own skulls, vertebrae, fins, and evolutionary history. Yet water pulls unrelated animals towards similar outlines when they must swim efficiently. This convergence gives some ichthyosaurs a familiar silhouette. But their world is not familiar. They move through seas where ammonoids are abundant. Conodonts are nearing the end of their long history. Reefs are returning, and other marine reptiles occupy the middle ranks of predation. The sea is not a backdrop for giants. It is the system that makes giants possible. Not every ichthyosaur becomes enormous. Many remain small or mid-sized, quick hunters of fish and cephalopods. This variety may be one reason the group succeeds so widely. A lineage with only giants is vulnerable if the food web shifts. A lineage with many sizes can divide resources across the ocean. Smaller ichthyosaurs can use coastal waters, open shelves, or prey fields unavailable to the largest forms. Medium-sized species can pursue fishes and ammonoids with speed. The giants can occupy the highest predatory roles, though their exact diets may vary from one species to another. Together they turn the late Triassic Ocean into a reptile-dominated realm where air-breathing animals have become as fully marine in daily life as any vertebrate can be, while still returning to the surface for breath. This dependence on air adds rhythm to their existence. Even the largest hunter must rise, exhale, inhale, and descend again, carrying the atmosphere into the sea one breath at a time. Plesiosaur relatives are also emerging from the nothosaur world into more committed marine forms. Early plesiosaurs and their near relatives show bodies with strong flippers, increasingly specialized trunks, and necks that begin to lengthen in ways that later Jurassic and Cretaceous forms will exaggerate. Some retain relatively large heads and strong tails compared with later long-necked specialists, marking them as transitional animals within a changing marine dynasty. Their teeth suggest hunting fish, soft-bodied cephalopods, and other slippery prey. Their four-limb swimming style differs from the tail-driven propulsion of ichthyosaurs, giving them a separate way of moving through the same water. The late Triassic Sea is not organized around one successful design. It contains multiple marine reptile solutions, armored bottom feeders, long-bodied coastal hunters, swift open-water ichthyosaurs, and early flipper-driven plesiosaur forms. Each design takes a different portion of the recovering ocean. The presence of these marine reptiles does not erase older or smaller life. It depends on it. Every giant ichthyosaur is supported by countless smaller organisms below it, many almost invisible in the grand image of a sea monster. Reef builders, shellfish, fishes, ammonoids, planktonic communities, and scavengers all participate in the same flow of energy. When a large animal dies, its body becomes an event, feeding sharks, fishes, invertebrates, and microbial life as it sinks or drifts. The ocean recycles size back into smaller mouths, and those smaller lives rebuild the system that will feed the next generation of predators. In this way, the late Triassic Sea becomes one of the clearest signs that life has moved beyond the first weak recovery from extinction. Complexity has returned strongly enough to support ecological height. There is again a top to the food web, and that top is immense. Yet even here, stability is not guaranteed. The same planet that has allowed marine ecosystems to recover is still tectonically restless. Pangaea remains intact for now, but rifts are opening, basins are changing, and volcanic provinces are preparing future disruptions. Reefs that return can be damaged again. Giants that dominate can vanish if climate, oxygen, or food webs shift too far. The late Triassic Ocean is therefore both triumphant and temporary. Its ichthyosaurs reach astonishing size. Its reefs rebuild living architecture. Its ammonoids and fishes fill the water with motion. But the foundations remain tied to a world still capable of sudden transformation. The Sea of Giants is not the final form of Mesozoic marine life. It is a high, powerful interval in a longer sequence of replacements. For now, though, the water holds what the land has not yet fully produced, bodies of enormous scale moving through a recovered system. Proof that after near ruin, the ocean has not merely refilled, it has grown vast again. The rains do not leave the Triassic world all at once. They retreat through landscapes that have already changed because of them, withdrawing from swamps, thinning forests, and leaving behind a planet richer than before, but no longer held in the same humid balance. As volcanic activity associated with the Carnian disturbance weakens and carbon dioxide is drawn down by expanding vegetation and weathering, the climate begins to swing back toward aridity across much of Pangaea. The supercontinent is still enormous, still difficult for moisture to cross, and still shaped by interiors far from the cooling, softening influence of the sea. The wet pulse has opened ecological space, but it has not broken the geography that made dryness powerful in the first place. Once rainfall lessens, the old continental logic returns. Forests become more open, flooded basins shrink, river systems grow more seasonal, swamps give way in places to dry woodland, scrub, bardlands, and exposed floodplains where water remains precious again. The late Triassic is therefore not a simple return to the earliest desert world. It is a second dry interval after life has diversified, and that difference makes it more crowded, more competitive, and heavier with consequences. The animals that had flourished under Carnian humidity do not all pass smoothly into this new phase. Rhynchosaurs, so abundant in many wet interval communities, decline sharply as the conditions that favored them fade. Some forest specialists vanish or retreat into narrowing habitats, Arboreal oddities that had belonged to dense vegetation lose the continuity of branches, damp soils, and sheltered microhabitats that supported their peculiar designs. The drying world does not need to destroy every forest to change the rules. It only needs to fragment the settings in which certain bodies work. A climber adapted to humid woodland may find fewer connected canopies. A plant eater specialized for vegetation common in wet lowlands may find its food replaced by tougher, more scattered growth. Amphibians tied to long-lasting aquatic habitats face renewed limits as pools become seasonal and rivers contract. The decline of these groups is not necessarily abrupt everywhere, but the pattern is clear. The Triassic has entered another filter, and this filter favors animals able to move through open ground, process tougher plants, endure seasonal stress, or exploit the prey drawn into the remaining green corridors. In this more open world, sauropodomorph dinosaurs begin to gain a stronger presence. Their early relatives had already appeared during the wetter phases, but the later Triassic allows some of them to grow large and widespread, becoming among the most important herbivores on land. Plateosaurus is one of the best-known examples. A long-necked, heavy-bodied animal still capable of moving on its hind limbs, but far larger than the first small dinosaur forms. Its teeth and body suggest a plant eater able to crop vegetation at different heights and process a steady intake of fibrous food. Other sauropodomorphs, such as Lesomsaurus and its relatives, push size even farther, showing that the path toward truly gigantic herbivory is already underway before the Jurassic begins. Their enlargement changes the ecology around them. A large herbivore is not merely a bigger version of a small one. It consumes vegetation at a different scale, travels across larger ranges, shapes plant communities through feeding, and provides predators with a new kind of prize. Once herbivores grow heavier, the pressures on hunters change with them. Pseudotsuchians remain the most imposing terrestrial predators in many late Triassic ecosystems. These crocodile-line archosaurs are not confined to water or to low sprawling forms. They include upright, active land hunters with deep skulls, powerful jaws, and bodies capable of challenging the largest animals of their world. Postosuchus, Saurosuchus, and their relatives show how dominant this branch can be. Some reach sizes that make early theropod dinosaurs seem slight by comparison. Their limbs support them high enough for active movement, and their skulls are built for force. In places where sauropodomorphs and large dicynodonts browse through dry forests and floodplains, Rauisuchian and other pseudosuchian predators occupy the upper tier of carnivory. The land still does not belong mainly to dinosaurs. It belongs to archosaurs more broadly. And within that larger rule, the crocodile line often holds the visible power. The classic image of the Mesozoic as a dinosaur world has not yet fully formed. The late Triassic remains a world where the dinosaur body plan is rising, but where many of the largest shadows still come from its archosaur cousins. Armored herbivorous pseudosuchians add another layer to this order. Aetosaurs, with their heavy body armor and often upturned snouts, are widespread components of many late Triassic faunas. They are not predators. Despite belonging to the crocodile side of the archosaur tree, their armor protects them while they forage, possibly digging or rooting in soil and feeding on plants or mixed resources depending on the species. Their presence demonstrates again how misleading modern comparisons can be. The crocodile line in the Triassic is not a narrow path toward river ambush hunters. It is an expansive radiation that includes large carnivores, armored herbivores, nimble forms, and eventually the small survivors that will give rise to true crocodilians. The same broad family that produces river threats also produces walking tanks of the dry woodland floor. In the late Triassic, this diversity makes pseudosuchians one of the most successful animal groups on the planet. Dinosaurs are important, but they are not alone in defining the age. Coelophysis brings the early theropod line into clearer focus. Known from large numbers of skeletons at Ghost Ranch in what is now New Mexico, it is slender, lightly built, and fast. with a narrow skull and recurved teeth suited to small prey. Its abundance in some deposits has made it one of the most familiar late Triassic dinosaurs, but its modest size is part of its meaning. Coelophysis is not competing directly with the largest pseudosuchian predators. It is using a different tier of the food web, hunting smaller animals, scavenging when possible, and moving with a quickness that larger hunters cannot match. In a semi-arid conifer forest or seasonal floodplain, such a predator can succeed without ruling. The future of theropods is present in its posture, balance, and active predatory form, but the great later expansion has not yet arrived. For now, theropods remain agile participants in a land where the largest carnivores often belong elsewhere on the Archosaur tree. Their success is real, but it is still measured against stronger neighbors. The drying climate also makes regional differences more pronounced. Pangaea remains physically connected, but habitats are not uniform across its full reach. Mountain belts, river basins, climate zones, coastal influences, inland deserts, and developing rift valleys create ecological divisions that can isolate communities even without oceans between them. A group that dominates one region may be absent from another. Some basins preserve faunas rich in sauropodomorphs and pseudosuchians. Others hold unusual combinations, with large synapsid herbivores or different predator lineages occupying roles that elsewhere are filled by dinosaurs or rauisuchians. This unevenness matters because it shows that connected land does not produce a single global ecosystem. Animals spread only where climate, food, corridors, and competition allow them to spread. Pangaea is one continent, but it is not one habitat. The late Triassic is made of many worlds lying beside one another under the same broad sky. Large dicynodonts continue in some places as reminders of the older synapsid order. Placerias, a heavy-tusked herbivore from western North America, shows that the lineage of Lystrosaurus has not simply faded after its early success. It has produced large, powerful browsers able to stand alongside the reptile-dominated communities of the age. In other regions, even larger dicynodonts, such as Lysowicea, reveal that synapsids could still achieve enormous size near the end of the Triassic. These animals complicate any simple narrative in which reptiles replace mammal relatives cleanly and completely. The replacement is uneven, prolonged, and full of exceptions. Dicynodonts are no longer the central architects of terrestrial ecosystems everywhere, but they remain important enough to shape the lives of predators and plants around them. Their persistence gives the late Triassic a deep continuity with the Permian world, even as the future gathers around dinosaurs, pterosaurs, crocodile-line archosaurs, turtles, squamates, and mammalia forms. The landscape itself is beginning to show signs of deeper instability. As aridity returns, rift valleys widen in places across Pangaea. Basins form where the crust stretches. Lakes gather in some depressions, then shrink and leave layered sediments behind. Volcanism has not yet reached the scale that will end the period, but the continent is no longer a motionless platform beneath its animals. Its midsection is weakening. The separation that will one day open the Atlantic has begun as strain, fracture, and subsidence to the animals living there. These changes are not visible as a future ocean. They are experienced as altered drainage, local earthquakes, volcanic landscapes, new basins, and barriers that may shape movement. The dry, late Triassic world is therefore stable only in appearance. Its ecosystems are crowded and successful, its predators large, its herbivores increasingly massive, but the ground beneath them is entering a long process of failure. The return of dryness brings the Triassic to one of its most powerful forms. It is no longer the devastated dawn after extinction, and no longer the humid forest of sudden opportunity. It is a mature Archosaur world, filled with large bodies, specialized lineages, and regional complexity. Sauropodomorphs browse high and grow heavier. Theropods run lightly through the spaces between giants. Atosaurs armor themselves against danger. Phytosaurs still haunt rivers. Rauisuchians hold the apex on land. Dicynodonts persist from an older age. And small mammalia forms remain mostly hidden beneath the noise of reptile success. This is the world that stands before the next catastrophe, not weak, not empty, but flourishing in its own strange way. Its strength makes the coming rupture more consequential. The late Triassic has built a complex order from the ruins of the Permian, and that order now rests on a supercontinent beginning to tear from within. The idea of Pangaea can make the Triassic seem simpler than it was. A single supercontinent suggests one enormous stage, one connected land where animals could wander from basin to basin without deep ocean barriers. In a broad sense, that is true. The joined continents allowed lineages to spread across distances that later geography would close. And fossils found on lands now separated by oceans still preserve that ancient connection. Yet the living world of Pangaea was not uniform. It was a continent of deserts, floodplains, uplands, rift valleys, coastal belts, monsoon regions, dry interiors, and river systems that shifted through time. A map of land alone cannot show the barriers that matter to animals. Heat can divide, drought can divide, mountains can divide, seasonal rainfall can divide. A chain of unsuitable habitats may be as effective as a shallow sea in keeping populations apart. By the late Triassic, this unevenness becomes increasingly important, because the supercontinent is not merely holding life together, it is also beginning to separate it into regional worlds. The fossil record reveals this most clearly through exceptions. In many late Triassic ecosystems, the largest herbivores are sauropodomorph dinosaurs or dicynodonts, and the largest predators are often pseudosuchian archosaurs, especially Rauisuchian forms. This pattern appears widely enough to feel like the standard architecture of the age, but then certain regions preserve communities that do not fit it cleanly. In what is now Poland, the rocks of the late Triassic have yielded a striking combination. There, a huge dicynodont named Lysowisia reached elephant scale, standing as one of the last and largest expressions of a synapsid herbivore lineage whose deeper history reaches back before the Great Extinction. Alongside it lived Smoke, a large predatory archosaur whose exact identity remains debated, with features that have invited comparison to theropod dinosaurs, Rauisuchians, and other archosaur branches. Whatever its final placement, it occupied a role usually expected of other top predators elsewhere. What makes this community so revealing is not merely that the animals are large, it is that they suggest a local ecosystem where familiar late Triassic roles were filled by an unusual cast. If Pangaea were a perfectly open ecological plane, such regional differences would be harder to explain. In some European deposits, the large sauropodomorphs that dominate other regions are not always the obvious herbivore rulers, and some of the biggest pseudosuchian predators known from elsewhere seem less central or missing. That absence may reflect preservation, sampling, or the unevenness of the fossil record, because deep time never gives all places equal evidence. But it may also reflect real ecological separation. A dry belt may prevent forest-adapted animals from crossing. A humid coastal region may support one community, while an inland basin supports another. Rivers can guide movement, but they can also create local traps and boundaries. Mountains raised by older collisions may channel rainfall and block migration. Rift valleys opening across Pangaea may form chains of lakes, escarpments, and lowlands that encourage some animals to spread while restricting others. A supercontinent is not a smooth floor. It is a folded and weathered surface, and animals move across it according to needs, not according to the simplicity of a map. This helps explain why the Triassic produces a mosaic rather than a single world order. In the American Southwest, places such as Ghost Ranch preserve communities where coelophysis is abundant, living among pseudosuchians, small reptiles, and the remains of semi-arid environments. In South America, the record includes early dinosaurs, large sauropodomorphs, Ereriosaurs, and formidable archosaurs in ecosystems shaped by seasonal conditions and basin histories of their own. In Europe, island-like ecological effects may have appeared even before full oceanic separation, created by local geography, rifting, and environmental patchiness. In southern Africa and India, older patterns of synapsid recovery and later reptile diversification leave their own signatures. These are not separate continents in the modern sense. Yet they behave in some ways like provinces. Each region receives the broad climate signal of Pangaea, but each translates that signal through local landforms, rainfall, soils, vegetation, and history. The result is a supercontinent that contains many versions of the late Triassic at once. The same unevenness affects body size. When a dominant group is absent from a region, another lineage may expand into the role it would otherwise have occupied. This is one possible meaning of Lysowicea. A dicynodont reaching such size near the end of the Triassic suggests that synapsid herbivores could still become giants where ecological space allowed them. Elsewhere, sauropodomorphs were beginning to take over large browsing roles. But in this Polish community, a different lineage seems to have held that weight. Smoke may represent a similar principle on the predator side. If the usual giant pseudoseuchians were absent or less common, another archosaur could become the apex hunter. Evolution often responds less to abstract superiority than to local vacancy. It needs an opening, a landscape that supports it, and competitors that are either absent, rare, or less well fitted to the immediate conditions. Pangaea, enormous as it was, contained many such openings. This regional complexity also complicates the story of dinosaur rise. It is tempting to imagine dinosaurs spreading steadily and inevitably across the supercontinent, gaining ground in a single directional advance. The fossils show something more textured. In some basins, dinosaurs become common earlier or occupy important roles. In others, they remain modest, rare, or overshadowed by pseudoseuchians and non-dinosaur herbivores. Sauropodomorphs may thrive in one area while dicynodonts persist in another. Theropods may appear as small hunters in communities where larger carnivory belongs to crocodile-line archosaurs. Early ornithischian relatives remain elusive, perhaps because they were rare, small, restricted to habitats poorly preserved, or not yet clearly distinguishable in the record. The rise of dinosaurs is therefore not a smooth flood over Pangaea. It is a patchy expansion, with local successes and local limits. Their eventual dominance after the end Triassic extinction can make these earlier patterns look like steps toward an unavoidable outcome. But during the late Triassic itself, the outcome was still hidden inside regional contingency. The developing rifts across Pangaea sharpen this mosaic. As the supercontinent begins to stretch, long basins form along zones of weakness. These basins collect sediments, hold lakes, and preserve trackways and bones, becoming windows into ecosystems that may have been separated from neighboring regions by ridges, dry uplands, volcanic fields, or changing drainage. The early stages of continental breakup do not create an ocean immediately. They create a landscape of tension, where the crust thins and drops in places, where water gathers in elongated depressions, and where local environments become distinct. Animals moving across such terrain would not experience continental breakup as a grand tectonic fact. They would encounter slopes, cliffs, lake margins, dry corridors, new river paths, and perhaps volcanic ground. Over time, these features could guide dispersal and isolation. The geological future begins as ecological texture. The Atlantic has not opened yet, but the conditions that will open it are already altering the living map. Even climate itself may have varied strongly across the supercontinent. Monsoon systems likely shaped some regions with seasonal rains, while interiors remained arid or semi-arid. Higher latitudes experienced different light cycles and temperature patterns from tropical belts. Coastal zones received marine influence. while inland basins depended on seasonal storms and river supply. These differences influenced plants first, and through plants, they influenced everything else. A sauropodomorph suited to one vegetation structure may not prosper in another. A small theropod may move through open woodland more easily than dense swamp. A dicynodont may succeed where low browsing and tough plant resources remain favorable. Pseudosuchian predators may track the abundance of large prey, but their own bodies also reflect the terrain through which they hunt. Every local ecosystem is a negotiation between inherited anatomy and immediate conditions. Pangaea supplies the grand frame, but the smaller negotiations decide who actually lives where. This is why the late Triassic should be imagined not as a single empire of reptiles, but as an uneven world of overlapping provinces. Some areas are ruled by Rawasuchians and armored Aetosaurs, while others carry abundant small theropods, large sauropodomorphs, or the last strength of giant dicynodonts. Some river systems still belong to phytosaurs, while others may be dominated by different aquatic predators. Above them, pterosaurs move through coastal and inland skies. Beneath them, mammaliaforms and small cynodonts persist in low, hidden spaces. The same age contains all of these arrangements, and the differences between them are not background detail. They are part of how evolution works. A lineage survives not in the average climate of a period, but in specific places with specific pressures. The uneven supercontinent makes the Triassic more difficult to summarize, but also more alive. It shows that the dawn of the dinosaur age was not a single sunrise spreading evenly across the world. It was broken by valleys, shadowed by older lineages, delayed by competitors, and brightened in some regions before others. Pangaea connected the continents, but it did not erase geography. Its size created corridors and barriers at the same time. In that contradiction, the late Triassic found much of its character. One land held many worlds, and because of that, the final crisis of the period would not strike a simple system. It would strike a patchwork of local histories, each with its own rulers, survivors, and unfinished possibilities. The first Atlantic is not an ocean at the beginning. It is a weakness in the land, a long system of fractures and sinking basins running through Pangaea before any broad waterway has opened between the future continents. To the animals of the late Triassic, this weakness would not appear as destiny. It would appear as rift valleys, lake margins, shifting rivers, volcanic ground, and perhaps distant tremors passing through dry forests and floodplains. The supercontinent still holds together in the visible sense. Sauropodomorphs still browse across parts of it. Pseudosuchian predators still move through open country. Phytosaurs still wait in rivers. Aetosaurs still carry armor across the ground. Small dinosaurs, pterosaurs, turtles, squamates, and mammalia forms still occupy their narrower spaces. Yet beneath all of them, the crust is stretching. The single landmass assembled across earlier eras has begun to fail along its seams. The Triassic world has already endured extinction. Heat, drought, rain, recovery, and regional division. Now the planet itself begins preparing the rupture that will end the period and remake the map on which the next age will unfold. Continental breakup begins slowly because rock, at planetary scale, can behave almost like something patient. Plates pull apart over immense spans, and the crust between them thins. Long troughs drop downward as faults open. Sediment washes into the basins. Lakes form, expand, shrink, and leave layered deposits behind. Rivers change course as the land tilts. These early rift landscapes show that the end of the Triassic is not an isolated disaster imposed on a stable world. It is the climax of a tectonic process already in motion. Pangaea is no longer only a supercontinent shaping climate from above. It is a supercontinent being pulled from below. The animals living across those basins may have felt only the local effects. A lake becoming more saline, a valley trapping heat, a volcanic plain interrupting migration, a river corridor opening through dry ground. But deep time gives those local changes a larger pattern. The greatest disturbance comes with the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, a vast outpouring of basaltic lava associated with the opening of the Atlantic realm. Its remains are now scattered across regions that were once adjacent within Pangaea, including parts of eastern North America, northeastern South America, western Africa, and southwestern Europe. This distribution is one of the clues to the old geometry of the supercontinent. Rocks now separated by ocean preserve the same volcanic event because they formed before the ocean lay between them. Across millions of square kilometers, fissures and volcanic systems release lava and gases in repeated pulses. It is not one simple eruption and then silence. What escapes is not only molten rock, but carbon dioxide, sulfur compounds, and other gases able to disturb the living world far beyond the lava fields themselves. Volcanism of this scale can drive climate in more than one direction, and that is part of why it is so destructive. Sulfur aerosols and ash can reflect sunlight and cool the surface for a time, producing intervals of volcanic winter. Carbon dioxide can remain longer in the atmosphere, strengthening greenhouse warming after the short-term cooling fades. Acid rain can damage plants, soils, lakes, and shallow marine systems. The result is climatic instability rather than one steady pressure. A world already shaped by warmth may be forced through pulses of cooling and heating, darkened skies and greenhouse intervals, rainfall changes and chemical stress. Organisms can often adapt to difficult conditions if those conditions are consistent enough across generations. What becomes harder is rapid reversal, with each change arriving before ecosystems have fully adjusted to the last. The late Triassic land communities have been successful, but they have also become specialized. Phytosaurs rule many river systems. Atosaurs occupy armored herbivore roles. Rauisuchian and other large pseudosuchian predators dominate many terrestrial food webs. Other herbivores, including sauropodomorphs and dicynodonts, form important parts of regional ecosystems. Many of these animals are large, dependent on stable plant productivity, water access, or prey abundance. Large bodies can buffer short hardship, but they also require steady resources. If vegetation is damaged by acid rain, drought, frost, or repeated fire, herbivore populations may decline. If herbivores decline, large predators follow. If rivers change chemistry or flow, aquatic and semi-aquatic hunters suffer. The end Triassic extinction does not need to strike every group with the same mechanism everywhere. It can unravel systems by attacking their supports in different places. Plants in one region, water quality in another, marine chemistry offshore, temperature tolerance across the continents, and reproductive success over generations. In the oceans, the crisis reaches reef builders, shelled animals, and long-established marine lineages. Corals and reef communities are especially vulnerable because they depend on favorable water chemistry, temperature, light, and ecological stability. Acidification makes it harder for many organisms to build carbonate skeletons and shells. Warming can reduce oxygen and stress marine food webs. Sea level changes tied to rifting may alter shallow shelf habitats, drowning some areas and exposing others. Ammonoids, already famous for surviving repeated crises by narrow margins, suffer severe losses but pass through the boundary in reduced form. Bivalves and other invertebrates are hit unevenly. Conodont, small eel-like animals with tooth-like elements and a history stretching far back into the Paleozoic, to reach their final disappearance. For marine reptiles, the pattern is selective. Some ichthyosaurs and early plesiosaur lineages survive into the Jurassic, but the giant late Triassic ichthyosaurs vanish. Placodonts disappear. Many coastal specialists and shell-crushing forms do not cross into the next world. The sea remains alive, but its Triassic architecture is broken. On land, the extinction removes many of the animals that had made the Triassic so distinct. Phytosaurs vanish, leaving river ambush rolls open for later crocodile-line survivors to reshape. Apatosaurs disappear. Many large pseudosuchian predators, once among the most powerful animals on Pangaea, are gone. Several unusual archosaur branches end. The last dicynodonts fade from the record, closing a synapsid herbivore story that had passed through the worst extinction in Earth history and persisted almost to the Jurassic. Temnospondyl amphibians survive in some lines for a time, but many large forms are reduced or lost. The strange local experiments of the Triassic, its gliders, armored browsers, false crocodiles, and regional giants, are thinned dramatically. The effect is not the total erasure of life, as at the end Permian boundary, but it is a profound clearing of ecological space. A world that had been crowded with competing archosaur dynasties becomes suddenly simpler in a new way. The crucial question is why some groups endure while others fail. Dinosaurs pass through the crisis comparatively well, though not unchanged. Pterosaurs survive. Crocodile-line archosaurs do not disappear completely. Small, more lightly built forms continue and eventually give rise to the crocodilian lineage. Mammalia forms persist in their small hidden roles. Turtles and early squamates also continue. Several explanations have been proposed for the relative success of dinosaurs and their close kin. Their posture and efficient movement may have helped them track shifting resources. Their growth rates and physiology may have allowed more active lives than many competitors. Insulating body coverings in some archosaur lineages may have buffered them against cooler volcanic intervals. Air sac systems or advanced breathing mechanisms may have improved oxygen use under stressful conditions. Dietary flexibility may also have mattered, especially for smaller animals able to survive on varied foods, including insects, seeds, carrion, or low-quality plant material. No single trait explains everything. It is more likely that a combination of size, physiology, mobility, reproduction, and ecological position allowed certain lineages to pass through the unstable boundary, while larger or more specialized rivals collapsed. The Central Atlantic rifting also changes geography in a lasting way. As the eruptions and extinctions unfold, the first true separation between major pieces of Pangaea begins to widen. Seaways enter the rift system. Basins connect. The supercontinent that shaped the Triassic climate starts dividing into the northern and southern landmasses that will later define the Jurassic world. This division matters because climate will no longer operate over one continuous continental interior. Coastlines will lengthen. Marine influence will reach farther into newly separated lands. Migration routes will change. Populations once connected across broad territories will begin separate histories. The extinction removes animals, but the breakup of Pangaea removes the old stage itself. The next ecosystems will not simply be Triassic communities with different winners. They will occupy a different planet in the geographical sense, one where ocean and land are being redistributed. By the boundary between Triassic and Jurassic, the quiet dawn of dinosaurs has passed through fire. The animals that emerge are no longer minor participants in a crowded archosaur world. Their greatest competitors have been weakened or removed, and the open roles before them are larger than anything they had previously held. This does not make their dominance instantaneous everywhere, and it does not make it inevitable in retrospect. It means that the extinction has changed the terms. Sauropodomorphs can expand into giant herbivore roles with less opposition. Theropods can grow into larger predator positions as pseudosuchian giants vanish. Small ornithischian lineages, still elusive, will eventually radiate into many herbivore forms. Pterosaurs will continue claiming the air. Crocodile-line survivors will withdraw and transform, no longer the many-shaped rulers of the Triassic land, but the source of a more familiar aquatic dynasty. The Atlantic begins as a fracture, but its opening is also a filter. Through that filter, the Triassic world passes into absence, and the Jurassic begins with space where many older rulers used to stand. The Jurassic begins in the space left by disappearance. The land has not become peaceful, and the extinction has not erased hardship from the planet. But the great Triassic balance has broken. Phytosaurs no longer wait in the rivers. Atosaurs no longer move armored bodies through the dry woodland. The largest Rauisuchian predators are gone, and with them, much of the crocodile line diversity that had shaped the land for tens of millions of years. The last dicynodonts have faded from ecosystems where their relatives once stood as survivors of the deepest catastrophe in Earth history. Placodonts have vanished from shallow seas, and the largest Triassic ichthyosaurs are no longer moving through offshore water. The world that had been so crowded with experiments now feels newly opened, not because life has been reset to emptiness, but because many of its most forceful occupants have been removed. Into that opening step, the lineages that endured dinosaurs, pterosaurs, small crocodile line survivors, turtles, early squamates, amphibians in reduced roles, marine reptiles that will reshape the seas, and mammalia forms still moving close to the ground. The inheritance of the Jurassic is not a clean victory. It is a changed set of possibilities. Dinosaurs are the most visible beneficiaries, but their rise still begins from a Triassic foundation. They do not need to invent themselves after the extinction. Their bodies have already been tested through the previous period: upright limbs, efficient movement, balanced tails, active growth, and diets that range from meat to plants to mixtures between. What changes is the scale of opportunity. With many pseudosuchian giants gone, theropod dinosaurs can move more strongly into the large predator roles that had once been defended by other archosaurs. They do not become enormous everywhere at once, but the direction is open. A lineage that had once lived beside larger rivals can now expand into the upper tiers of carnivory. At the same time, sauropodomorphs enter a world where large herbivore space has been cleared across many regions. Their long necks, heavy bodies, and plant processing strategies can now grow towards sizes that earlier ecosystems may have limited. The first true sauropod giants are still ahead, but the path toward them is no longer narrow. The extinction has not made dinosaurs superior by magic. It has removed many of the groups that kept dinosaur possibility contained. The early Jurassic landscape, therefore, carries an unusual mixture of emptiness and momentum. There are fewer kinds of large animals than in the richest late Triassic communities, but the lineages that remain are ready to diversify. Sauropodomorphs spread across broad territories, feeding in herds or loose groups through fern prairies, conifer, woodland, and river plains as plant communities recover under the new geography of a breaking supercontinent. Theropods follow the expanding herbivore base, some remaining small and quick, others growing larger with stronger jaws and longer strides. The first small ornithischians begin to appear more clearly. Modest herbivores or omnivores that will eventually lead to some of the most varied dinosaur forms of later ages. At first, they are not spectacular. Their importance lies in endurance and future potential. The Jurassic does not immediately display the full dinosaur world familiar from later imagination. It begins by letting several dinosaur branches expand at the same time, each one occupying space opened by the disappearance of Triassic competitors. Pterosaurs also pass through the boundary into a larger sky. Their Triassic ancestors had already solved powered flight, but the Jurassic gives them more time and more environments in which to specialize. Coastlines lengthen as Pangaea separates. Inland seas, lakes, lagoons, and river deltas create feeding grounds where flying reptiles can hunt fish, insects, and small animals. Some retain long tails and sharp teeth, while later branches will alter skulls, wings, and tails in new ways. Their presence changes the shape of the Mesozoic atmosphere. The sky is no longer the domain of insects alone, and it is not yet shared with birds in any major way. Pterosaurs hold that vertebrate aerial world first, crossing distances that ground animals cannot easily cross and tying together coast, cliff, forest, and water through flight. Crocodile line archosaurs survive too, though in a reduced and altered form. The great Triassic variety of pseudosuchians has been cut back, but smaller crocodilomorphs continue, some lightly built and active, some beginning the long movement toward aquatic and semi-aquatic lives. Their survival is quieter than dinosaur expansion, but it matters deeply. They are the thread that preserves a once dominant archosaur branch after most of its Triassic shapes have vanished. In time, their descendants will become the crocodilians of later worlds, holding riverbanks, swamps, coasts, and estuaries with a kind of patience that echoes the older ambush hunters, even though the lineages are not the same. This shrinking of the crocodile line is one of the great reversals at the Triassic-Jurassic boundary. A branch that once filled many of the largest land rolls becomes more restricted, while the dinosaur branch, once partly subordinate, widens into dominance. In the oceans, the Jurassic does not inherit the Triassic Sea unchanged. It inherits survivors and vacancies. Some ichthyosaurs continue, no longer represented by the immense late Triassic giants, but still swift and important marine predators. Plesiosaurs expand into clearer forms, with some lineages developing long necks and small heads, and others later moving toward shorter necks and larger skulls. The disappearance of placodonts and other Triassic specialists leaves shallow marine rolls to be refilled by different animals, while reefs, ammonites, fishes, sharks, and marine invertebrates rebuild in the altered chemistry and geography of the new period. The breakup of Pangaea changes circulation, coastlines, shelf habitats, and marine corridors. The sea becomes not merely recovered, but reorganized. It will produce its own Mesozoic dynasties, some graceful, some enormous, some predatory at scales that rival the land. Small mammalia forms remain mostly outside the grand visible drama, yet their continuity is one of the most important quiet facts of the transition. They survive the extinction by occupying low-demand niches, using small bodies, precise teeth, likely nocturnal habits, burrows, and warm insulation to live around the edges of reptile-dominated ecosystems. The early Jurassic does not reward them with open rule. Dinosaurs take the large land rolls, pterosaurs take the air, and marine reptiles take much of the sea. But mammalia forms keep refining the hidden arts of small life-hearing, smell, chewing, parental care, and activity in darkness. Their success is measured not in landscape dominance, but in uninterrupted survival through a world where larger lineages rise and fall above them. The same extinction that clears a path for dinosaurs also preserves, almost unnoticed, the ancestors and close relatives of a much later mammalian expansion. Plants also enter the Jurassic, changed by the old cycles of drought, rain, volcanism, and recovery. Conifers, cycads, bennettitalians, ferns, horsetails, and seed ferns shape the vegetation available to herbivores. There is still no grassland in the modern sense, no flowering plant world of the later Cretaceous. Dinosaur herbivores feed in landscapes of fronds, tough leaves, woody stems, and seasonal growth, and their bodies adapt to that botanical world. Large sauropodomorphs browse across heights unavailable to smaller animals, while smaller herbivores take lower plants and softer growth. The structure of vegetation influences posture, neck length, tooth form, digestion, and movement. The dinosaur age is never only about dinosaurs. It is also about the plants that feed them, the soils that hold those plants, the climate that governs rainfall, and the continents that shape where forests, deserts, and floodplains can form. The opening Atlantic slowly changes all of this by giving the world more coastline and less supercontinental interior. The psychological shape of the story changes as well. The Triassic feels like an age of trials, a time when life, newly recovered from near ruin, produces many possible rulers at once. The Jurassic feels more directional, not because evolution has acquired a plan, but because extinction has narrowed the field. Dinosaurs now stand in more of the open space, and their future radiation begins to seem, from a distance, like the main road. Yet that impression should be held gently. Nothing about the early Triassic guaranteed dinosaurs. Nothing about the Carnian rains crowned them. Nothing about the late Triassic made their triumph unavoidable, while Pseudosuchians still held so much power. Their age begins through contingency, survival through climate stress, useful anatomy already in place, competitors removed, geography shifting, and ecosystems needing new large bodies to fill the gaps. The quiet dawn becomes an age only because many other dawns are extinguished. By the time the Jurassic settles into its own rhythm, the world has crossed a threshold. Pangaea is opening. The old Triassic rivers no longer hold phytosaurs. The armored etosaurs and last dicynodonts are gone. The strange forest climbers and shell-crushing placodonts have mostly disappeared into stone. In their place, dinosaur herds and hunters begin to spread more widely. Pterosaurs move above widening coastlines. Surviving crocodile relatives reshape themselves near water. Mammalia forms continue beneath leaves and roots. And marine reptiles rebuild the hierarchy offshore. The Triassic has ended, but it has not vanished. Its experiments have either died, survived, or become foundations. Its extinctions have carved the space in which the next world grows. The dinosaur age does not begin loudly. It begins after loss, in a thinner landscape, with bodies already prepared by an earlier struggle. From that quiet inheritance, the Jurassic opens, and the long middle act of the Mesozoic starts to unfold. After the long recovery, after the dry interior of Pangaea, after the strange forests, the crowded rivers, the first wings, the hidden mammal forms, the giant seas, and the final volcanic rupture, the Triassic rests as one of Earth's great transitional worlds. It is not only the beginning of the dinosaur age, it is the interval that makes that beginning understandable. Life does not rise from catastrophe in a straight line. It returns unevenly, through survivors that seem temporary, through bodies that belong to no later pattern, through climates that open one path and close another. The Triassic holds all of that motion. It carries the memory of the Permian world, the invention of the Mesozoic world, and the first signs of futures that will not fully arrive for many millions of years. Its animals feel strange because so many of their lineages ended before they could become familiar. Its landscapes feel unstable because the planet beneath them was still reorganizing after one crisis and moving toward another. Yet within that instability, the essential work of renewal continued. Plants spread where water allowed them. Reptiles entered the sea and air. Archosaurs tested the land in many forms. Small mammal relatives kept their quiet place in the dark. Dinosaurs began as modest shapes in a crowded world. Then inherited space, after the final Triassic extinction, cleared away many older rulers. The dawn was quiet because it was not a moment of sudden triumph. It was a long accumulation of endurance, anatomy, chance, and loss. In the stones of the Triassic, Earth records a world still healing, still changing, still uncertain, and from that uncertainty, the next age slowly opens. The Jurassic does not erase what came before. It carries it forward, softened by distance, preserved in bone, ash, trackway, and buried shore.